Hey, what's up, guys? Back in studio for the Resilient Show, and I'm super pumped for today. I have a very special guest, my son, Hunter Robichaux. That's a spoiler alert. Hunter is my son, if you don't recognize the resemblance or the last name. And the reason we're doing a show together is because we have a announcement, which I think we've already announced plenty of times, but if you hadn't been aware, my new book, A Mission Without Borders, releases August 13th. It's up for pre-sale now. I'm super excited. The subtitle of Mission Without Borders is Why a Father and Son Risk It All for the People of Ukraine. I know a lot of people, especially in this audience, is not big fans of the billions of dollars being sent to Ukraine by the U.S. taxpayers. I'm not either. However, I am a big fan of helping people who can't help themselves, the true victims of this war. And that's why, I went to Ukraine 10 times. Hunters went 13 times. Overall, Mighty Oaks Foundation has a continuous presence there, but 30 specific trips there. But this book really isn't about the geopolitics of the Ukrainian war. What this book's really about is a father and son, both combat veterans, going into the combat zone of the Ukrainian-Russian war and doing humanitarian work together. And how me, as a father, dealt with the fear of that, the anxiety, the desire to want to control the situation, like most parents should want to do, and learning to relinquish that fear in a trust in both God and a trust in my son to do the things that I believe God called him to do, and he believed that God called him to do. That's what the book's about. Before we even get started, I want to ask, if you have not pre-ordered this book, go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere books are sold, and pre-order a copy of Mission Without Borders. If you don't know about how books work, it helps so much to pre-order a book or to order the first week it's released. That's how you make the bestseller lists. And when you get on a bestseller list, it's not just about title. It's about retailers coming in and buying more because they get behind it, and it just really snowballs and amplifies. And so for us, it's not just about selling books and getting on a list. For us, these books help us to be able to get behind the efforts that we do in humanitarian work and the work that we do at Mighty Oaks. So when you support buying a book, one, you get a book and hopefully enjoy it. And two, you really are investing in the missions that we do and help move them forward. And there's so many things we're doing around the world right now that you don't even know about. Investing in something like this will help us continue to help people around the world who can't help themselves. So take a moment. You can hit pause and go and order this book. But we're going to dive in. So Hunter, awesome to have you here.
Yeah, I'm glad to finally be on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I've done a lot of media with you. We've done interviews and stuff together, but I've never actually interviewed you. And so you're my oldest son. And I think interviewing you, I thought about this a lot. Like, I think it might be a little awkward at times because we'll be going all the way back. I'm not going to skip like I do a guest and want to know like growing up in childhood. I'm not going to skip that. And so maybe awkward at times, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And I think it's going to be actually super special. And I think people appreciate, not just parents, but I think people will really appreciate it. I'm not going to treat it different than any other interview. We're just going to do it.
Yeah.
So I start off with everyone's bio. You're no different, as we said. So I'm going to read your bio. So here we go. Hunter Robichaux is a third-generation Marine and part of our family's 80-plus years of military service. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and both of us, independently, father, son, separate from each other, deployed separately to the same war in Afghanistan. Not only are we 80-plus years of service, but my father, your grandfather, was a Marine, and then we just learned, because we thought he was in a different branch of service, we just learned that your grandfather on mom's side was a Marine as well. In the Pacific?
He was in the Pacific. I traced his records down to joining the Marine Corps at the beginning of World War II with the Marines island hopping campaign.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing I haven't been able to track down the exact location yet, but I'm guessing it would have been Guadalcanal.
Yeah. So big history of military in our family, and we're going to talk a lot about that. You're currently the director of Mighty Oaks International at the Mighty Oaks Foundation, which our family founded back in 2011. You have overseen over 30 international humanitarian missions to a number of countries, including Ukraine, where you personally have went to Ukraine on 13 operations, oftentimes going behind Russian lines alongside some very high-level and experienced special operations veterans from places like Delta Force and the CIA. And, you're leading trips with guys like that. It's been amazing to watch. You've done some public speaking, and you are one of the main subjects of this new book, A Mission Without Borders, again, releasing August 13th, but I know most of you guys just went and pre-ordered it, so that's awesome. Thank you. And one of the cool things about the book is you actually write the concluding chapter of the book. And so that's your first author. You write the concluding chapter, which I believe was absolutely powerful, but I'm biased because I'm your dad. But all the editors at Thomas Nelson wrote the same thing. And then all the endorsers that wrote, we had some crazy level endorsers from Sean Ryan and Kaylee McEnany and Eric Metaxas and Tommy Waller. All these people wrote, and again, including the editors and myself, said when they read your concluding chapter, the consensus was that everyone actually cried reading it. It was just so powerful. And so I am super proud of you, not just for writing a chapter, but for the work you've done, the choices you've made in your life to do the things you've done. And I'm super excited to dive in that part. I also want to mention that you just completed your private pilot license. So congratulations. I think by the time this episode rolls out, you have done that. And you're currently getting rated for your commercial pilot. Last but not least, very important to me, you're a husband, father of 2, and you have 1 on the way. So you and Alex have been married quite some time. You have Charlie, Addie, and then Hunter Jr.
The second.
Hunter the second is on the way, which our other son, Hayden, beat you to it. We just had Malachi last week added to our family. He's our 4th grandchild, but our first grandson. So Hunter the second will be our 2nd grandson, and we can't wait to meet him. Before we get into the episode, we have a kind of tradition now that we started on the show that we actually give the gifts on the front end of the show. So I have a gift for you. As everybody watches knows, we have incredible sponsors on the Resilient Show. We have Smith & Wesson, Vortex Optics, Gators Eyewear, Ally Wealth, Midas Gold Group, and BioPro, and we also have BioAccelerator, the stem cell company. Today, I want to give you a kind of special gift from Smith & Wesson and Vortex Optics. We have the Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0, and it's a metal frame framed for a light. It's pre-cut for an optic, and the optic we have on it, that we put on it, is a Vortex Defender ST red dot, and it's already mounted on there for you. Have a plug in here for everybody watching. There you go.
Man, that thing's awesome. Smith & Wesson, I love these pistols. They're super nice. I'll definitely be using this. Smith & Wesson, if you're looking for a new brand ambassador, you got one. No, yeah, thank you so much. I've been wanting one of these pistols for a while.
Well, you were shooting mine, and really, he was overly using mine. And, and so, the team at Smith & Wesson wanted to give that to you. And then, Shamus and the team at Vortex Optics, man, they are such incredible people.
Yeah, Vortex has always been obviously one of my favorite optics for killing an elk or a deer or having it in my pistols or rifles at home.
Yeah.
For home protection. But yeah, this is an amazing setup. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that it?
And that's it. I don't have the gummy bears. I ate all Sean Ryan's gummy bears. You already have gators.
Yeah.
You already have gators, and you have access to BioPro and BioX. But I don't think you need it yet.
No, not yet.
you don't need to go down to BioX and get the stem cell yet.
No, haven't been that hurt.
But thank God you haven't. So I want to cover deployments in Afghanistan as a Marine.
Yeah.
I want to talk about Mighty Oaks International. I want to talk about the Afghanistan withdrawal. But I want to spend the bulk of our time talking about Ukraine because you've been to Ukraine more than I have now. But I want to start off with your childhood growing up with me.
Yeah.
As your dad, I feel like I could probably cover this for you, but it would come from a completely different perspective. But I do want to say this, as your dad observing, you grew up really unique. My career's paths have been pretty unique. You got to be around, I don't think many kids get this, you got to be around some pretty amazing humans. From a very young age, you were always friends with my friends who were like special operations guys, like tier 1 top level special operations guys, then professional athletes like fighters, like world champion jiu-jitsu guys, speakers and authors and business owners who are, successful billionaires. And then down to, people from our family, like grassroots, like people who, didn't get past the 5th grade and work on a shrimp boat. And so you've been around just a eclectic group of people with all different backgrounds. And you've always really kind of gravitated towards adults. And really, I think you really just leaned in an opportunity to learn from all these people. And it's really shaped you for who you are. So just as an observer of your life, I think that's really been a big factor in your life and growing up as a kid is just being around all these people. That's my kind of insight from that. Is a lot of other stuff I could say, but I won't because I want to let you have this opportunity. Pretend I'm not here. And what was life like being Hunter as a kid?
Yeah, I think it would do a disservice to not be totally open with the audience about my childhood because I think it's a very common thing amongst not only young men growing up in a regular civilian community, but really a young man growing up in a military community. Two different types of lifestyles, but there's challenges in each one of those areas. So obviously you and Mom got married and you guys were on 29 Palms. That's where I was born.
On the Marine Corps base.
On the Marine Corps base, yeah. And General Mattis was your CO at the time, right?
Yeah, it was Colonel Mattis at the time, yeah.
Yep. So I come from, obviously, one of the best Marine Corps generals there ever was. I was under his command at one point as a baby, so I can say that. But yeah, so I was born on 29 Palms, and then you got out of the Marine Corps, and we moved back to where you were from, which is Louisiana.
Or I shifted off active duty to the reserves for a few years.
Yeah, so we moved back to that area, and that's kind of where my life began in a way. I don't remember too much of it. Some of my earliest memories are me being at our house in Booty, and someone bringing over the big alligator, throwing it out of the back of the truck, and the thing exploded.
I remember that. I remember this
like
huge alligator, like a 12-foot alligator in the back of this pickup truck, and we pulled it out, and his tail hit first, so he went down like a rope. And when he came down, like all the swamp water and blood and everything in him like went through his body and ejected out of his mouth, and it sprayed me in my face and got in my mouth. I remember.
Yeah, I remember that. So that's one of my earliest memories. Yeah. You did so much to provide for us. You were working as a police officer with St. Charles Parish. Mom was cleaning houses. I would go with Mom while she was cleaning houses. She would have to clean up after me while cleaning the house because I was tearing everything off the walls. Just being that typical little boy. But something happened during this time frame when we lived in Louisiana that would follow me through my life. That would really ultimately lead me to an addiction with pornography. Mom and you were obviously busy with work and had to get a babysitter for me, which is a very common thing. A lot of people aren't able to have a stay-at-home mother. So the babysitter was the option. And that babysitter ended up molesting me for quite some time. At the time, I didn't know what it was because I was this young kid. I didn't know what sex was. I didn't know what was right, what was wrong. And so she would have me doing things to her and she would do things to me. It's probably the first time I've ever opened up to you fully about it because it's still weird to me to this day. I'm 27 years old, have a wife and 2 kids and one on the way, and it's still a weird thing. But I think it's so important to know if you're someone that has been in this situation, if you're someone that is going through this situation, it's a very common thing, especially amongst the military community.
I think at Mighty Oaks, we've tracked it, that we are about 70% of our people that come through Mighty Oaks, they had childhood sexual trauma. Yeah. That's on the male side.
Yeah. I
don't know in the women's side, I think it's more. But, we got these guys that are tough, combat veteran, infantry Marines and whatnot, and they come through, and when it comes time to tell their testimony, it's never like, hey, when I was in Afghanistan or Ramadi. It's always like when I was 7, when I was 8, and in these stories of childhood molestation. So you're right, it's so common and it's so important for people to know that so many people struggle with it.
Yeah.
And usually it doesn't come out and surface till adulthood. I don't think you first mentioned this until adulthood.
Yeah, I didn't. From the ages of 4 to 6, that was going on. So I just kind of put that in the bag. Obviously, I was kind of hurt. I remember one time me being at home with the babysitter, and it was either you or Mom leaving, and I'm looking out the window as you guys are driving away. Like, I know what's about to happen with this babysitter. And I didn't want it to happen because it made me feel like weird, but I didn't know if it was right or wrong. The effects of that will go later on in my story, but 9/11 happened. And I remember vividly watching the news as 9/11 was happening. And I remember how basically our whole life changed after 9/11. You got into the Air Marshals, and that was like a quick turn and burn. We moved to Denver, Castle Rock specifically. And then you were at the Air Marshals for a little bit, and then you went on a trip to Houston with Mom to go check this area out. And that's where you got your new job. And so you were back in the military. And we moved out here, a new life. I was like, all right, this is like a new start for us. I was kind of running away from some trauma that happened in Louisiana. So we were always a tight-knit family. Obviously, I'm the oldest. So Haley and Hayden, it's not like I could have talked to Haley or Hayden about that. I kind of just had to deal with it, kind of had to grow up, mature at a younger age. And so You left on your first deployment in 2004. That's when we were living in the apartment waiting to buy our house. I think you might have left for your deployment, or it was like training. It was when I got in trouble at school and mom made me go to school with like poor man clothes on so that like I would be grateful for the things I had.
Yeah, I don't remember when that was, but I remember doing that.
Yeah. So hard parenting, but it helped. Yeah, so you start deploying right around that time, and before you left, you basically told me that I was the man of the house. Like I had to protect my brothers, my sister, my mom, like to be very mature. Like my childhood was like, not that it was taken away from me, but it was like, you are not allowed to be a child. You need to be a man. That's what's expected of you. And I think that's so important to tell our sons or a young man that we're mentoring is how important it is to be mature from a young age. Because the less mature you are in life, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse over time. You go on your first deployment, and I remember from when you left on your first deployment to when you got back from your last deployment, you significantly changed. I remember seeing the happiness and like the eagerness to go out and do things when you would be at home and drift away. So you come home from your first deployment. I didn't see too much of a change, like mentally. Obviously, like since I've been to Afghanistan, you probably wanted to go back. You probably wanted to go back and do the things that you were doing because it's a rush. Like you miss that rush when you're not doing it. You miss being around your boys. You miss doing those types of things. There's nothing like it. As time goes on, I start to become a little bit bitter towards you because the dad that I wanted there for me was not there for me. I would go to school and I would see kids have their dads come to school and hang out with them for lunch, or I would see their dads pick them up from school. Meanwhile, my dad is in Afghanistan. I remember some kids, because this was around like 2005 to 2008, some kids had dads in the military, and when I would see you, I would tell them, oh yeah, their dad's in the military too. And then first question every guy in the military asks. And so you asked me, what does their dads do? And one of our neighbors down the street, his dad didn't have like some crazy job. And it was like,
I remember him. He was the mailman. He was the male.
Yeah, he was the male guy. We love male guys. We all need male guys in the military.
You have to get males.
Yeah.
At that time, I wasn't a big fan of male guys.
Yeah. We can all get into the mindset of we're better than everybody else in the military. But I remember that's how it kind of was. But I was like, man, like I really wish my dad was here for these things. Like I wish my dad was there for that baseball game that I double leg take down a kid trying to run from first to second base.
Yeah, I gotta mention that you grew up wrestling and jiu-jitsu since you were like could walk. I remember I brought you to jiu-jitsu in the infant carrier, and then I would say one day you crawled out. So I say you start training at like 3, but as soon as you crawl, you're on the mats. I have a video of you practicing arm bars on mom's belly when Hayden was in there, because you were like training with your brother, and you were like 2 years old and drilling arm bars on mom's belly to train with your brother. And Texas is big on baseball, so we're like mom thought we'd throw you in baseball so you could actually do a Texas sport while I was gone to keep you busy. And all you knew was wrestling, and so you're running the base, and the guy's about to put you out, and you just double legged him. Yeah. And all the parents freaked out. Like, he doesn't even know what he's doing.
Yeah, that was the end of my baseball career. Yeah, went out swinging. But yeah, so like I had to find these things to kind of cope with it, to cope with you being gone and me being bitter. And there's a wrestling club in Spring called Spring Klein. And so I started wrestling at Spring Klein. It's probably at the time, it was like a 30-minute drive. Yeah. Now it's probably further because of the traffic in Houston. It was something that was really good for me because I started wrestling like officially in Colorado. And then when we moved out here, my mom got us into it, or me into it, and it really helped. I loved it. That was like a way for me to kind of deal with the things that were going on. And then fishing. Fishing was like something I would always do. So every time I get home from school, I'd go out and go fish in the ditch behind our house. Kind of let me like clear my mind of missing you. And so as time goes on, every time you come back, you start to change. It starts to get worse. Like the attitude towards everyone gets worse. The blow-ups, like how you are with mom, how you are with me, how you are with Haley or Hayden. The mental side of you was fading. Before your last deployment, I remember you basically saying like, I got to go, and me like not wanting you to go, and how like my body like couldn't physically stand because I was so heartbroken. Yeah. And so it still affects me to this day because like I couldn't imagine Charlie, my daughter, having to see me leave her deployment. And so you left on that deployment, and And the dad that left in 2004 wasn't the same dad that came back on that final deployment. One thing I would look at that on that entire deployment, because I didn't think you were going to come home, was the stick that we broke in our backyard. And I was wanting that stick to be connected so bad. And the thing behind that stick is when the Spartans would go to war, they would leave their son with an olive branch that they would break in half. And when the father would go to war, he would take one half and the son would keep the other half at home. And so I never thought that stick was going to be reunited again. And
the book Gates of Fire, Stephen Pressfield.
I thought that stick wasn't going to be connected again.
Yeah, for those listening, it was pretty symbolic that would do that with Hunter. The book Gates of Fire talks about the two halves of a man. The one half's the warrior, the other half that's a father and a husband, and has compassion. Separate that during times of war, but you should always be able to come back and bring that back together. So that sticks like almost like it was used almost like a dog tag to be able to identify, because the way it fits back together.
Yeah.
For those killed, but it was also like a symbolism with the family to be able to bring that back together. And it wasn't just saying I got home. It's saying like, okay, I'm gonna have compassion again. I'm gonna have the ability to be a father again and be a husband again. So you let that compassion come back. And so yeah, it was something that I did ceremonial with you, was to leave you that half of that stick as a kind of leader of the family while I was gone. By the way, like for those listening, what Hunter's talking about when I left in the last deployment, and this shows how kids could sense stuff. I believed in my mind, like we all when we're going to go to combat think, what if I don't come back? But at that moment, because of things that happened in our operation, a compromise that happened, things that were falling apart, I literally remember leaving, believing that I would never see you again too. I believe that I'm not going to come back from this deployment. Like I had this imminent sense. And so I remember like you crying when you're talking about not being able to hold yourself up. I was trying to hold you and your little legs were like collapsed, and we're holding you, and I let you sleep in my bed last night, last night I left, which I'd always do. And we slept in the bed with me, and you just would not stop crying. You did not want me to go. And it was so hard to leave with you crying that way. And I remember just like, I wasn't very strong Christian at that time, but I remember just praying like, God, bring a man, like, obviously you're thinking like, I'm going to be gone. Like he's going to need a dad, like bring a man into his life to replace me as a father, which is a very difficult thing to pray when you, to trust your kids being with someone else. Like, but I really believed like this imminent sense of doom was over me. And so I believed I was going out on this last deployment and not going to come back. And I think you sensed that as well. And I remember that's like such a vivid memory for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So you got through that deployment and came home, and you're like completely different. And throughout this whole time, you had a lot of really good friends that you would work with, a lot of guys that would come and check on me when you were deployed. So I became like really close to these men
who were like recon Marines and SEALs, and
like the cream of the crop, the best guys on the planet to do it. And so I remember looking at them and like questioning, why are they not struggling like my dad? Why are they not in the same place as my dad? They've done all the same things he has, at least most of them. Why aren't they on a complete mental breakdown? Mm-hmm. And I still don't know it to this day why they didn't. Maybe they hid it better than others. Mm-hmm. But I looked at these guys for kind of like some support, kind of like some guidance. And then after you were pulled out, all that was pulled away from me too. Those relationships with those guys was basically over within 24 hours. Mm-hmm. I didn't see any of those guys for quite a few years after that last deployment. I was like basically in a spot in life where the man I looked up to the most, you, was in this basically broken state, and the other guys that I looked up to a lot weren't around, so I was alone. I felt alone. I still had that burden of being the man of the house, like trying to intervene when you and mom would get in arguments, trying to be the peacemaker, trying to really make sure that our house was stable. So you get back, and I remember you sitting on the edge of our pool in the backyard and like sitting in this chair, just like staring out into space. And I knew something was like really wrong. I knew you were completely changed. And so time goes on. And the only thing that you knew how to do besides being a Marine was jiu-jitsu and martial arts. And so you opened up the gym. And this was kind of like the transition from military to civilian. Whatever you did, it was like you're going to go big with it. So you started Gracie Barra The Woodlands, or really elite MMA at the time. And then we transitioned into Gracie Barra. It seemed like it was going to be this most amazing thing ever. Like, I made some of my best friends at the gym. We would have UFC fight nights. Like, we'd have the big projector screen in the gym, and
we'd have hundreds of people.
Hundreds of people would come to the gym to watch the fights. Now I know people didn't want to spend $60 on a fight.
Yeah.
They wanted it for free, so they come watch it at the gym. But it was like so fun. Like, it was just this massive community, and I start to feel like some happiness, like, because I had that bitter and I had that anger in me still. But like, when I would go to the gym, like, it wasn't even the jiu-jitsu that would take my mind off what happened in my life. It was the people that were around me. There's a lot of funny stories that happened, from the food fight on the highway and McSteve's car getting totaled by Alex.
Oh, that was funny. That was funny.
That was crazy.
We got to share that story.
Yeah.
So it's Alex Morono. If you guys watch UFC, Alex Morono is like, I started coaching him when he was like 15 years old.
Yep.
And now he's got like 20 fights in UFC. And we had this giant food fight in the, well, first of all, right before that, because like I said, you didn't hang around with kids, you hung around with us.
Yeah.
We go to the event, and I just think you're with one of the other guys, and you're in the row with us, and you're like 12 years old, 10, 12 years old, yeah. And I didn't even realize you were gone. And then I get a phone call from a random number, and you're like, "Hey, you guys left me at the hotel." And we had totally left you at the hotel, and then there's some lady in the background saying, "Hurry up, baby, you gonna use all my minutes." You're using some lady's prepaid phone card. And and then we get back and have this giant food fight in the parking lot, and McSteve has this brand new, we call him McSteve because he's a manager at McDonald's, has this brand new car, which was like a tiny little coupe car that he was super proud of. And it had like 5 people in it, like a little clown car. I run over and smash a peanut butter pack on Alex's windshield, and he turns around and throws something at me, and he's trying to get away. So he throws his big work truck in reverse, laughing, Alex Morono laughing, and floors it. It doesn't realize that McSteve's car's behind
Don't
him.
forget to mention that McSteve verbally said, "Don't hit my car."
Yeah, don't hit my car with food. And so we didn't hit it with food. He hit it with a giant work truck and T-boned it and totaled it with everybody jammed inside of it. That's pretty funny.
Yeah. Those are the types of things that, like, I look back on and I'm like, man, I would never had that experience if I wasn't a part. If we didn't have that gym. So funny. But yeah, like, this was like, the crew of guys was so funny. I mean, we had a guy that, I'll keep his name out, but his nickname was Zoolander because he had Beauty Through Pain tattooed on his ribs. Like, he was a model. Like, the most random people.
It's one of the great things about jiu-jitsu. And, for those that don't do jiu-jitsu or understand why you do jiu-jitsu, like, we go on these trips and we'd have like 20, 25 guys on these trips for jiu-jitsu tournaments or MMA fights. So it's like a huge group of guys. But what's interesting about jiu-jitsu is you have a guy that's like, has an ankle bracelet. He's on parole because he was a cocaine dealer. And then you have a guy who's an oil executive, owns, an oil company worth millions of dollars. And then you have a federal agent with the FBI, and you have a dentist and an emergency room doctor and a professional fighter. Like, all these people have nothing in common outside of jiu-jitsu, but they hang out together and become best friends.
Yeah.
And so that's a really interesting and neat thing I've always loved about jiu-jitsu and the jiu-jitsu community.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so that was kind of the community I was in. It made me happy because it was always a laugh every day. You didn't know what you were going to see. But that didn't last for long. The struggles that you came back with followed you through that.
Yeah.
Followed our family. You had your trials and tribulations during that time, and you and Mom would separate. And when you and Mom separated, I remember being so bitter because I felt like you were giving up on our family. Mm-hmm. I felt like you just decided to walk away from our family because you felt like we were better off without you, which no family is better off with 2 parents separated. I'm not saying that from a personal standpoint, but I'm also saying that from a biblical standpoint. It was extremely challenging for me to find like my new sense of purpose or happiness throughout this time because I didn't have it. Like, it wasn't there. you know, when you moved into your apartment, I remember being so excited that you had your apartment because I was like, well, I'm going to be able to go live with dad. Like, cause I was like, I've always been a daddy's boy. Like I always wanted to be with you. I was like, he's got his own place now. He's not staying on friends' couches. I get to go hang out with my dad. It's always going to be a lot more fun at dad's house. Yeah, you made it fun, but I could still see that struggle in your eyes. I could still see that the demons that were chasing you. It would just progressively get worse. I remember going over there and being like, something's off with my dad today. Something's not right. Like thinking my dad was going to kill himself. And in your testimony, obviously you talk about that. And I couldn't imagine that ever happening because I would be here today without a dad. My children wouldn't have a grandfather. Mom wouldn't have a husband. And so it would have completely changed the trajectory of my life if that would have happened. Like I can 100% with confidence say that I wouldn't have a relationship with Jesus Christ right now if you killed yourself.
You felt like you sensed that I was going to do that, not because of anything I said or.
Yeah, you can always tell by a person's eyes when there's the temptation of suicide.
Yeah,
at least that's for me. And so I knew that there was like an extremely terrible situation going on within you. Around this time is when I was introduced to porn. Mm-hmm. And so that incident that happened when I was a child with my babysitter followed me into finding a way to cope with that with watching porn. Now that I'm a grown man and now that I have a relationship with Christ, like I know that's not the solution. Mm-hmm. Like that's not a way to live my life. And so that's the way I coped with it. And that's the way I thought it was right. I saw my dad chasing down women. I saw my dad going after women. I thought women were the only way to cure your pain. And so that's what I did. It just made me more depressed. It made me more angry. It made me more bitter within the whole situation. It made me bitter at mom. It made me bitter at people around me. It made me bitter at the military. Like I always wanted to be a Marine, but it made me bitter at the Marine Corps, even though I wasn't in the Marine Corps. Like it made me bitter at the Marine Corps because I felt like they changed you. In your testimony, you talk about how you almost killed yourself. And then basically right after that, you changed your life, turned your life 180, and you started Mighty Oaks. You and mom moved back in together. I was so happy that you and mom were moving back in with each other because I was like, our family is connected again. Like you and mom are going to work things out. Like everything's going to get better. I thought it was going to get better for me. But for change in your own life, you have to change. It's not other people doing things in their lives that's going to change you. It's what you have to do for yourself. And so I didn't get better. We started Mighty Oaks. We moved to West Cliff, Colorado in December of 2011. You and mom got back together that year. And when we moved out there, I was like, man, this is a fresh start. Like I'm moving up into the mountains of Colorado. There's no one out here. I'm kind of an introvert in a way. Like I like being in the middle of nowhere. I like being where it's just forest around me, being able to go outside and shoot anywhere. And so I thought this was going to be like the holy grail of Hunter's change in his story. And it really wasn't. As soon as we got to Colorado, the school I was going to had a really good wrestling program.
When we say really good wrestling program, the coaches ended up being myself, Brad Anderson, who's a Olympic alternate Greco wrestler and Randy Couture, like Randy, 5-time UFC champion, Randy the Natural Couture.
Yeah.
That was a high school wrestling team.
Yeah, it was probably the best coached high school wrestling team in the country and the smallest wrestling team in Colorado.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a wrestling team of 14 guys. Our school was really small, so we didn't have a lot of guys on our team. Like our practices were insane. Our practices were at 9,000 feet elevation, and Randy and Brad would try to really coach Brad. Coach Brad was the main coach. He would try to just kill us legally.
Yeah.
To make us the most hardened wrestlers really on the planet. It was what was in his mind.
His pride collection was a display of wrestling shoes that hung from the ceiling of the high school gym.
Yeah, for all the
ones he made quit. and I mean, this is
yeah,
like modern day, right? Like you had to. It didn't matter if your mom bought those wrestling shoes for $200, whatever. If
they were going up there.
Their shoes are going up there for everybody to shame you.
That is still the hardest thing I've ever done in my life was Coach Brad's wrestling practice at midnight on New Year's Eve.
Well, it's like an 8-hour wrestling practice, right? Yeah.
It was the worst
like
wrestling.
Midnight to 8 a.m.
Yeah, it was brutal. The hardest thing I've ever done in my life still to this day.
Yeah. He still laughs about it.
Yeah. I mean, we had kids like literally convulsing because they were so tired and crying so hard.
Yeah.
If a pastor was in there, he thought he would have to perform an exorcism or something. It was bad.
By the way, that's not an exaggeration from like high school days. Not an Uncle Rico story.
No.
Brad Anderson's
He is
ruthless.
Yeah. Best wrestling coach on the planet. Yeah. So I thought this was going to be something that was a fresh start to start my life up again, kind of get me out of this slump that I was in. And it didn't. I was there still. It didn't change me. Being the fresh meat in a small school, like all the girls were like, oh, this is the new guy. Like, let's go after the new guy. And me, like, I'm like, yeah, like, why not?
Yeah.
You know, the puberty was starting to kick in. Like, I wanted to talk to all the girls I possibly could. And
you're like the wrestling stud there at the time.
Yeah. And so I was like, I want to see what all this is about. So like I started talking to girls, things started getting sexual, and that's where the pornography transitioned to physical. I didn't find any satisfaction in that. It was a tunnel with no end. I would get deeper and deeper into that, and my heart just felt empty. My heart felt completely alone. And you and Mom were doing good. Obviously, like you guys were still in your healing process. Things were still being mended on y'all's end. Me, on the other hand, I'm trying to figure out a way to be like you guys. Mighty Oaks is starting to grow. We have our first program in West Cliff, and then we decide to do the actual legacy program. We called it Fight Club at the time. We decided to do the first Fight Club, and I remember going to that, like hoping that I can find some truth in that. And I wouldn't say like it wasn't that I didn't believe in God, but I didn't believe that God had the power to completely change my life. And so I went into that program like in a way of like, what's this all about type of thing. And I didn't take the tools that were being taught at that program into my life. I think I was 14 or 15 at the time. I was younger than that. I was 13.
Which for those listening, like it was not a program for kids. We had our first group of veterans come through, and you just being my son that was there with everything. We're just like, hunters here.
Throw them in.
Yeah. Hunters here. Yeah. Throw them in. Yeah.
Yeah. And so at that program, I would meet a man that would become very important in my life at the time, like through this season, someone that would give me a lot of biblical insight, a lot of biblical knowledge, and a lot of biblical guidance. Mm-hmm. And that's Mr. Ron. Mr. Ron and I connected at Mighty Oaks. He was a man from Kentucky, this older dude that loved fishing. So he would take me fishing on the Arkansas River when we go for trout.
He's like 80 years old at the time, right?
He was 60.
60?
Yeah,
he seemed like 80.
66. He's 76 now.
Okay.
Talked to him about a month ago.
He seemed way older.
He's an old man, but he was a Marine in Vietnam. His dad was a AOG, Assembly of God pastor in Kentucky. So they're like very traditional, like Baptist. So he's like, if it's not King James Version, it's no Bible type of guy. But that's what I needed in my life at the time. He became
like your friend. Like,
yeah, someone that I really looked up to.
You guys hung out every single day. Which was weird because you're like 15 and he's almost 70. Okay, not 80. But
So him and I would go fishing almost every single day. And every time I was with him, he would just start opening up his Bible and telling me about God's word. Mm-hmm. And, it's probably more evangelistic than some people would like. But that's exactly what I needed. I needed someone that was going to tell me that there is a heaven and a hell, and that there's a way to Christ, and what is the true way to Christ. And I'm so glad that he had those conversations with me, and that he was mentoring me throughout this process. I don't think my life would be where it is without his guidance on my life, constantly preaching the word to me. And so we move out of West Cliff, and I keep my contact with Mr. Ron. Mr. Ron and I became like really, really close friends. Him and I would talk every single day, like for an hour and a half to 2 hours. And, he became like the grandpa to me that I never had, because obviously your dad wasn't a picture in our lives, and Mom's dad, he wasn't really a picture in our life either. And so he became that like grandfather picture to me. I remember the first year we started Mighty Oaks, you and Mom didn't have enough money to buy us Christmas presents. And it's not like Mr. Ron had a lot of money. Mm-hmm. He was living off the VA, and he would use his own money to buy us these Christmas presents, our whole family. And, he just genuinely loved us. This is the type of guy that Mr. Ron was. So I kept in contact with him. He would always encourage me to get into my Bible, to read God's word, to get involved in church. Obviously, he really wanted me to join the Marine Corps. He was a Marine, And, you know, he would talk to me about the challenges that he had in the Marine Corps. He was an alcoholic for many years, and God transformed his life. And he's been through many challenges and stuff, but one thing that he would always point back to was how God changed his life through scripture. And so that was something that I needed in my life. I needed someone that was a mentor to me. I needed someone that was going to tell me the things that I needed to hear through a biblical aspect. And I'm so glad that happened because it led me to a decision in 2014. So we moved back to Texas after the first year and a half, 2 years of Mighty Oaks. And back out here, Mighty Oaks starts getting some momentum. We start getting more programs. We start getting more donations. People are really getting behind what you had started. I still had that brokenness. I still had that depression. I still had that anger and bitterness in my heart. But I knew that there was some truth within the Bible. I didn't know if it would really help me. I didn't know if it would really change me. And so we come back here, we get back into the gym, we create the Mighty Oaks office in Gracie Baja Magnolia. I start training, I start teaching jiu-jitsu. You know, my life kind of became better. I still felt like there was some struggle that I was going through, but it started to feel like things were going better. One of my best friends, Colin, his parents, they were able to pay for me to go to Pine Cove, which is a Christian camp in Tyler. And I went to this camp. And I thought it was going to be the dumbest thing ever because I graduated high school a few months before this early in hopes of joining the Marine Corps. And so I was like, man, this is going to be the dumbest thing. Like, the only reason I'm going here is probably to chase after girls. Well, I'm pretty sure that God molded that whole week around my soul directly. The words that I heard at that camp were the exact words that I needed to hear. And so in the summer of 2014, I made the decision to accept Christ into my heart personally because, yeah, you guys, I would go to church with you. I would go to these events that you were speaking at churches, but I didn't have a relationship with God. I was just a spectator. And so I made that decision to allow Christ into my heart to completely transform me, and it completely changed my life. I'm not saying that it was an overnight transformation, but I can look from where I'm at right now to where I was. It's been a complete night and black and white difference.
Yeah.
And so I get out of this camp, I come back home, and I join the Marine Corps a few months later. But one of the most, I think, important verses that I can relate to during that whole process of my life, from childhood to being a teenager to us starting Mighty Oaks to me becoming a Christian, is 1 Corinthians 13:11. It talks about, it says, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, and I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. And you read that verse to me. You challenged Hayden and I to become men. And it took a year for that challenge to become fruition. I put away those childish things of being addicted to certain things, chasing after girls because that's a childish thing to do. There's no satisfaction coming out of that. It's a childish thing to do. I put away those things and I decided to become a man. And what does that man relate to is it's being a man of God. And that's what I needed to change my life to fully become the man that God created me to be. So I went into the Marine Corps in the beginning of 2015. I was ecstatic because I was like, this is my lifelong dream. I was like, I'm accomplishing the goal that I set years ago. I'm becoming the third generation Marine. Like, there's no better branch in the Marine Corps. I wanted to do the best, so I joined the Marine Corps. And at some times, I think I should have joined the Air Force to be a fighter pilot, but I'm so glad I joined the Marine Corps. I'm so glad that I went through all those trials and tribulations through my upbringing, through all the trials and tribulations of you being deployed, to when we started Mighty Oaks, that led me to that point in 2014, which prepared me for that next chapter of life and becoming a man and joining the Marine Corps.
As you and I decided together, your decision, but I was able to speak into you joining the Marine Corps, what branch and what your job would be. I know you talked about doing a lot of different things, and I really recommended you becoming an ANGLICO Marine because I just know you and thought you would really like that job and really thrive in that job. And for those that don't know what it is, ANGLICO is Air Naval Gunfire Liaison Company. And Marine Corps actually has this unit that is able to call in airstrikes, air support, naval gunfire off of ships, and artillery. And so the Marine Corps actually has that to work in small 4-man teams to give that access to other countries, other nations. So it's kind of like a liaison where these 4-man teams go into, an allied force or indigenous force to be able to utilize U.S. assets. We're not going to let the Afghan National Army call in a A-10 Warthog or call in a naval gunfire off a ship. They're going to have some liaison there. So that's the Marine Corps ANGLICO team. And so I knew about the specific niche job. I know you, and I thought that'd be a really good job, and I recommended that to you. And you ended up really gravitating towards that, loving that job.
Yeah, that was so there's a show called The Pacific, and Eugene Sledge at one point in the show is calling in artillery. That was always a thing that I kind of gravitated towards. Obviously, being a recon Marine would have been cool, but they would have been doing the exact same thing you did. I wanted to do something that was different, but something that I felt like it was going to really challenge me, but also something that I would love and still love to this day. And so ANGLICO is really special and specific.
But ANGLICO wasn't actually your MLS.
ANGLICO is a job, so I became a 0861 Forward Observer.
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to do that job. I knew I wanted to be with ANGLICO. ANGLICO has a very unique capability of being able to do naval gunfire and close air support compared to just a regular artillery battery where you're a forward observer calling in artillery. Kind of what separates ANGLICO amongst all other units is that we have that naval gunfire capability. There's not really any other branch or job within the DoD that does naval gunfire. There's NGLOs, Naval Gunfire Liaison Officers in the Navy, but there's not a lot of those. And usually those guys come to ANGLICO.
Yeah.
So
yeah, they say outside of ANGLICO, they're not on the front line.
Yeah.
Calling in.
Naval gunfire is probably one of the coolest things, in my opinion, that I got to do. Calling in bombs off a destroyer-class ship onto San Clemente Island. And it would have been awesome if I would have got to do it in North Korea or something. It'd been
awesome for you, not for the rest of the world.
Yeah, it would have been terrible. We would have been a really bad war. Naval gunfire is something that's so unique. Nobody gets to do it. Probably a lot of people don't even know it's a thing. Yeah. The last time it was used in combat, I think, was in Vietnam.
Yeah.
So it's a capability that the DoD has, and ANGLICO is the main provider of that. And then close air support, that's kind of our bread and butter. Really good capability of doing that. Basically, if it has wings and guns on it, we're going to use it to drop bombs or shoot bullets out of an enemy position. And obviously artillery. Artillery's been in battle for hundreds of years. So artillery is kind of like the basic thing. It's not super hard, it's not super sexy, but the king of the battlefield is artillery, or it was. There's a bunch of new technology now, but howitzers have always been something that are really powerful, and HIMARS. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of the effects of HIMARS within Ukraine right now, with both Russia and Ukraine. So,
what countries did you get to work with in training, outside of?
Yeah, in training, I worked with Japan, South Korea, Australia, the British Royal Marines, the Georgians, the Brazilians, Canadians, yeah.
I went to Canada.
There's a few other ones that are probably not listening. Czechs.
So that's what makes it such a great job. You get to work with all the other nations' militaries as a liaison for that.
Yeah, it's a really cool job because in ANGLICO, you're always traveling, going places. You're not kind of sitting around stationary like an 0311, all right, we're going to train on Horno today and do some live fire exercises. It's now we're going to go to Thailand and go in Cobra Gold, or we're going to go in Australia and do something, or we're going to South Korea to do some stuff. This is really, really neat. And I love the aspect of being able to teach. If I learn something, I want to teach it because it not only helps me retain it, but it helps me love it even more. Mm-hmm. So we go and attempt to teach the Georgians how to do artillery because it's the most basic thing. And you would see their deficiencies and you'd be like, all right, this is how you can work on it.
Right.
It was really fun.
I think a lot of life attributes come from that job. You have to be able to think really fast under pressure, the pressure of calling in live ordnance. One of the things unique about ANGLICO is that you're a jumper. And, I was a military freefall parachutist and, started off at Army Basic Airborne School and all ANGLICO Marines are jumpers. Why is that? Why does ANGLICO have to have the jump capability?
Yeah, so it gives us the ability to deploy really with any unit that is jump capable. So ANGLICO attaches a lot to Army units or any special operations unit in the military. We have the ability to jump with them. If you are in a brigade within ANGLICO, because we don't have platoons, we have brigades, you have to have your wings. If you don't have your wings, you usually get pulled off a deployment that requires it.
Yeah.
or they'll send you to jump school really quick.
What is these 4-man teams called?
Fix.
Fix.
Fire control teams.
Fire control teams. And so, like, what is in a fire control team? Who is in a fire control team? It's pretty unique. Like, who are the 4 guys?
Yeah, so you have your radio operator. So usually your radio operator is going to be trained up on how to call for fire, so that if something happens to one of the other 3 members or all 3 members and he's by himself, he has the ability to take over that job. But his main responsibility is to make sure that all of our radios are loaded with every single channel that we need. So on our radios in Afghanistan, we had 34 channels set to each one of our radios. Making sure that those radios are set. There's certain things that you have to do with the radio so that they can't be hacked into, so loading crypto into them. Radio operators continuously loading the crypto into the radios so that those radios aren't intercepted by foreign intelligence. Radio operators are really like the engine of a FIC team. They make things work.
Yeah.
After that, you have your forward observer, you have your JTAC, and then you have your FIC chief. Your FIC chief is most likely going to be your senior JTAC. The FIC chief is going to be someone that has really good knowledge of the whole mission itself, but can also call for fire, knows the radios real well. Like from my experience, it was like a radio operator master sergeant.
Yeah.
So this is really unique. So on a 4-man team, you could have a lance corporal, a sergeant, and then a master sergeant. Mm-hmm. So a first sergeant is usually in charge of like a company, right? Mm-hmm. A master sergeant in ANGLICO is usually in charge of like three other dudes.
Yeah.
And so you guys become really close. And then you have your JTAC. Your JTAC is basically just the glorified forward observer that has the legal authority to give the cleared hot call sign. There's more training when you become a JTAC, but he has the paper that says, I'm allowed to tell an aircraft that he is legally allowed to drop a bomb off his wing. And then your forward observer is basically the second JTAC, and then your radio operator. So your forward observer and your JTAC are working simultaneously. Like there would be multiple missions that I was on in Afghanistan where my JTAC would be out in one area and I'd be in a different position, and he would lose communications with the aircraft that was overhead, and I would have to pick up comms. Or I would pick up comms, I'd start working, and I'd lose communication, then he picks up. You become hand in hand. Everybody's working together in that fire control team.
So you got to do this job in combat. I remember, man, like so proud of you for joining the Marines. So happy. Like I was just really happy about it. And then when you were about to deploy, I had a very hard time, obviously, because of my experience in Afghanistan was so hard. Resurfaced a lot of things in me. Hadn't had panic attacks in years. Resurfaced panic attacks. All this stuff I started dealing with. Just really fearful of losing you. But you ended up having a really good deployment, but a very serious deployment. 2019. For those that wasn't following Afghanistan, you got your son deploys in the same war as the dad. So, we deployed in the same war, not the same location, the same war of 20 years. And I lost friends there. I've had my own experiences there. And now my son's going there. And so it's very difficult for me. And you get there and I'm like, okay, he's going to be fine. He's going to be fine. Like you get there and immediately you get there and in the unit you guys were leaving had a V-bid driven into it and 3 Marines were killed.
Yeah. One of the most surreal things I think that has ever happened in my life, and especially in combat. It's different when you have an American die, but it's really different when a Marine dies, because this isn't like a game. This isn't something like you play around with. Like each one of these guys gave their life sacrificially for their country. Like for example, Staff Sergeant Slutman, one of the 3 KIA, he was in the reserves. He was from New York, and he had a wife and some daughters. I think he had 2 or 3 daughters. A day or two after they were killed, I was having to go through their gear, and I found Slutman's rifle. And
we said going through their gear in a vehicle that was hit.
Yeah, in the vehicle. So their vehicle was hit by the V-bid. Hines, Slutman, and Hendricks were all killed. So driver was Hendricks. The V-bid hit on his side, driver's side. It went through the door, went through his body, and went out top of the gunner's hatch. And so killed him instantly.
Which is a powerful explosive to
powerful.
Go through a MRAP period. Like,
yeah, it was
especially
insane.
The Max Pro MRAPs are like meant to prevent that.
Yeah. So went through his body, killed him instantly. Hines was on the top and killed him pretty much instantly too. Slutman was the vehicle commander, so he's in the right seat. He basically burned to death. They were trying to get Slutman out, and the vehicle is engulfed in flames. The other occupants of the vehicle hit the emergency escape hatch and were able to escape. The way when you're in combat on these missions with these vehicles is that you lock the door from the inside and you can't unlock it from the outside. But there's a special tool that we all had on our vehicles that you can go up to that vehicle, put the key, like the wrench, into the bolt, turn it, and pull the door open. Well, they weren't able to get Slutman. Slutman, I'm pretty sure he would have died instantly because of the projectile that went through the door and exploded. Everybody in that vehicle was charred, burned. His pistol, because he had his pistol on his leg, they weren't able to recover his pistol because his pistol burned into his leg. So he's buried with his pistol attached to him. So I'm going through this equipment because the government is more worried about making sure that we have a pair of nods or an M4 compared to let's get these guys back home. I'm just a little bitter about that. But, you know, I'm going through these guys' equipment that they had on their body when they were killed, and I see the pieces of flesh on these weapons, and I'm thinking, like, what was the last view that these weapons saw? What was the last view that these men had with these weapons on them? It is so crazy seeing an M4, like, with a barrel bent because the fire was so hot that it was molting the metal on these guns, like a M240. The 240 was completely charred. Like the Max Pro that they were in was completely engulfed in flames. These guys were 3 minutes away from being home, and they got killed. So it completely changed my perspective on combat itself because, yeah, I would watch war movies and people die in war movies. I would read the stories about guys dying in combat, and, you know, it was a story. It wasn't personal to me. And then when you get there and that happens, it completely puts things into perspective. At the time, Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps was Sergeant Major Green, and was it General Neller not General Neller.
It was.
General Neller was the commandant. They came and spoke to us because there's 3 Marines that died. It was a big deal. They came and spoke to us, and one thing that'll stick in my brain till the day I die is that the enemy always has a vote. The enemy always is going to get something from combat, whether that's killing or gaining ground. There's always going to be people that die on both sides. And this kind of did something in my brain. I was like, holy crap. Like, I could go out here and I could be the next one that gets killed. Like, yeah. I wasn't afraid of death. I think I was more afraid of the pain of death, because that is like
burning to death,
a pretty traumatic way to die. It's not like I die of old age and kind of slowly fade away in a bed overnight. I have a freaking Toyota Corolla completely filled with explosives jamming into the side of my truck and blowing up and like pulverizing us, or like blowing off all my limbs, and then I'm on the side of a road bleeding out. Like that crap was crazy to think about.
Well, I mean, and I'm at home. I'm talking to Sergeant Major Green, like Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, and I'm connected with people like your Sergeant Major was a recon Marine. You had Shepler that was in your unit, so they're like sending me reports, like praise reports about you going on patrol and a V-bid coming after your vehicle and you shooting up a V-bid and stopping that exact attack to you guys. Yeah. And they're telling me this stuff, and I'm getting information that as a dad, a dad should never send his son to combat in the same war zone because it's just too close to home. And then secondly, a dad should never be privy to the information that his son is experiencing in combat. But I was getting that firsthand, and they were sending it to me like praise reports, because they're like, hey man, you should be proud of your son. He just lit up just shot up a V-bid and stopped another V-bid attack. And so I'm getting all this information I shouldn't have been getting. And it's making me insane.
Yeah, it probably didn't help your case. I was having fun, but
yeah, exactly. And then you guys were really cool that you had some great Marines there with you. You guys were all Christians, and I remember even you guys calling before an operation, and you and your FIC team were like sitting there and asked me to pray with you guys, and I was on Zoom getting to pray with you guys before you rolled out on an operation. You guys had some kinetic combat in 2019. Marines, just so people know, like there was no kinetic, like conventional combat for Marines or Army or anybody in Afghanistan. We're supporting the advising Afghan National Army and Afghan National Police. But you guys were in a different situation because you were embedded with the Georgian military as the ANGLICO team supporting the Georgia, not the state of Georgia, the country of Georgia's infantry unit. So you guys are going out the wire and doing their convoys and being their providers for close air support. Tell me about some of those incidents that you guys dealt with kinetically, and particularly about the vehicle that you shot.
Yes, there's a few separate occasions. One of the first times I ever shot at a person, it was my first mission out. And, I'm like super aware at this time. Like over time you get more comfortable and you kind of relax a little more. But my first time out, I was like, we're going to get hit tonight. I remember my master sergeant telling me, he's like, we're going to effing get hit tonight, boys, get ready. And, so he was like extremely motivated because his last deployment was in Sangin, and like every time they go out, like they would get into a hornet's nest. And that's not how my deployment was, but every time they were going out, they were getting in a gunfight.
So he's expecting that.
Oh, he's expecting that.
Yeah.
I'm down, but it's probably not going to be like the good old days. And, we get out there, and I'm like, holy cow, like this is Afghanistan. Like you go from your base to the real world. And I just remember like looking on the streets.
What do you mean by the base to the real world?
So you go from America and Afghanistan, which is the base, right?
Yeah.
So like you have
you talking about Bakhmut Air Force Base? Like it's. I mean, when I went, it was like super primitive at the time, but by the time 2019. You have a movie theater, you have Burger King.
It wasn't that bad when I was there because all that shut down in like 2014 and 15. But at one point, it was like a full-on like LA place.
Yeah.
I mean, the Air Force did have like Cinco de Mayo parties, like and dance parties, and we'd come back from a patrol and hearing them party and being like, "You guys have no idea."
So you
honestly,
leave,
we were
leave that
jealous.
to go out into the outside the wire.
Yeah, outside the wire, and you're like, "Holy crap." These people live in mud huts. Like these people, there's roamers. Like these people literally live on a donkey and they go around the country living like in a tent. They wake up in the morning before the farmer comes out and beats the dude's freaking brains in with a shovel because he's on his farm. Like it's a whole different world there. Like these people set up nets in fields to catch birds. Like
I have to ask. So I think I asked you this before. Like, so you grew up knowing that I went to Afghanistan and I lived. I spent 2 weeks on a base out of all 8 of my deployments. Like I lived out there. Was there ever a thing like, oh wow, this is where my dad was?
Yeah,
my dad actually lived out here. Like,
on that front gate of Bagram.
Yeah,
and gate number 1.
Right.
Which I'll get into that because I have a crazy story about that. But yeah, I thought I would think about that every time I was out. I was like, I wonder if my dad ran across the street, and then I would think, I wonder if Aziz is passing me by tonight.
Yeah. Aziz wrote
me and said if I ever need anything, he'd be there.
You said your Uncle Aziz is out here.
Yeah.
Uncle Aziz, yeah.
Yeah. And so Aziz, the warlord in Kabul.
For those that don't know Aziz, I think most people listening probably knows Aziz, but Aziz was my interpreter and my teammate for all 8 of my deployments.
Yeah, so we went on that first patrol and I was like, this is it. Like, I'm here. Everything I've trained for, everything I've wanted in my life, everything I've, thought Afghanistan would be, like, this is it. And I remember seeing the jingle trucks drive by. I remember seeing the people on the sides of the streets, how crowded it could be, how dirty it could be. And then you have some like palace in the middle of this like junkyard. And you're like, how the heck? Why would someone build a palace next to this junkyard? Like beautiful trees, beautiful fruit trees and nice grass. And then the people next door are building bombs in their garage. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. We start going into this area. The first place we passed by is where the VBID happened.
That killed those other Marines.
That killed the 3 Marines, yeah. And it was like, holy crap, this is real. Like, we're here. we start going down this road, and I hear reports. So one of the crazy things, and I don't know how I did it, but we would take turns controlling aircraft. And every time we would go on a patrol, we would have aircraft above us, whether that was Apaches or F-16s. Sometimes I would be controlling aircraft while on the gun on the top of the truck, or the JTAC in the bottom would be controlling as well. So we have reports that there was a vehicle coming at us, big dump truck at this time. We had reports of a dump truck that was filled with explosives that was going to be a VBID. For those who don't know, a VBID is a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device. So pack as many bombs and explosives as you can into the vehicle, drive it into the middle of a convoy or the middle of a patrol, and detonate.
Kamikaze style. Suicide bomber.
Yep. So we knew that there was this vehicle coming. There's 3 vehicles ahead of me, 1 behind me. So I'm vehicle number 4. And it's Georgians. We're the only American vehicle. We were not in disguise. They knew who the Americans were. We had more antennas on our vehicle. All of our stuff worked. Like, they knew who the Americans were. And sometimes we get a little like pushy with it. Like, I'd slap American flag stickers on the front of my plate on the gun so that they knew that we were Americans, because I was like, I want to kill all of them if they're going to try to kill us.
Well, you're gonna be the target, right? If Taliban's coming after you, they're gonna go for the American vehicle, and you're the. I mean, just from a strategic standpoint, if I'm gonna attack a convoy, if I'm the bad guy gonna attack a convoy, I'm gonna get the one within. Yeah, I'm gonna get the one that has communication ability to be able to, they get antennas to be able to control aircraft.
Yeah. So the vehicle starts coming, and the Georgians, I think the Georgians were scared to shoot sometimes because they were scared of repercussions. Because for the Georgians, it's not like they can go back home and get another job. Like, that the military was it for them. And if they messed up, it would really mess up their life. So they would shoot these pin flares. And I wish they wouldn't shoot these pin flares. I wish they'd shoot actual bullets at these vehicles coming, because it either you're going to stop or you're going to continue. And so this vehicle comes up on me, and I squirt some rounds at it. I put it straight into the engine block. Mm. On my 240, I had this laser. I called it like a ball. It shoot out a massive laser beam that would basically blind you. It wasn't like a little dot. It was like a massive flash. And so I sprayed their truck, and obviously they stopped. I blew out a tire, and so they were inoperable. And I put that laser on their windshield, and I was about to shoot into the windshield, and I saw hands come up. And so I kept it on them, and driver down at the bottom floored it. So we got out of there. Didn't hear any intel on if that was a VBID or not. We're pretty sure it was. I'm glad it didn't detonate it. If it was, I'm here to this day by the grace of God. So get out of that position. And then we're headed back home a few hours later, and another vehicle comes at me, and it's another dump truck. And so, like, I've never been a one that uses like curse words or cusses, but I verbally screamed, and obviously the dude doesn't speak any English. I verbally screamed at the dude, like, effing stop or I'm going to effing kill you. Mm. And so the dude, because I think he saw me, because I came out of my turret. I wasn't like sitting inside something. Like, I came out of it, and like I was on it about to shoot, and dude stopped, and we passed by him and nothing happened. But at this time, the threat was so high of VBIDs that I wasn't like wanting to be the person that was going to give someone a chance. I was like, if all my Marines are killed below me and I'm the one that survives, like, I'm going to have massive survivor's guilt. These guys have families. These guys have lives outside of the Marine Corps. I don't want to be the one that's responsible for them dying. So I took it pretty seriously. Time goes on. We have a few other instances like that. My buddy Aiden, he had a really big situation that came up, ended up taking out a legit VBID. And then about 2 weeks later, I had a pretty serious situation. So at the time, I was going through some really rough times at home. I decided to swap seats with one of my best friends that I do a lot of international work with. His name's Steve. Steve and I switch seats. He takes the gun for that night. I'm in the back. I pop open the emergency hatch and I'm out the back with my rifle. And so I'm watching behind us, making sure no one's creeping up behind us. We get reports of a V-bid that was a white Corolla. And sure enough, what pops up in Afghanistan is white Corollas everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah.
And there's a white Corolla that comes up on us. Well, it matched the description. We had 3 military-age fighting males in the car. They fit the part of what looked like Taliban. Steve asked me, he's like, hey, Hunter, like, we got this vehicle coming up. Steve was my boss. He was a sergeant. I was a corporal. He was in charge of me. And he's asking me for advice because I had spent months up there. And I said, if they move, kill them. That's hostile action. Vehicle's coming up. It's creeping up. We had our interpreters on a speaker telling the guy to stop. He wasn't stopping. Georgians are shooting pin flares, and then they get this like paintball gun. They start shooting the dude with paintball. Didn't stop. And so Steve squirts some warning shots at him. They don't stop, and he shoots another few warning shots at him, and the vehicle comes to a stop. I'm like, cool. It's still like a few feet away from us. Like, we're going to keep eyes on the vehicle. So I'm out the back of the hatch. I'm like out of the truck, like on the top of the vehicle with my gun pointed at him. Steve's got his gun pointed at him. We think everything's fine. The dudes are looking up at us. But one thing I remember was the driver in the back seat. He was like this.
The driver in the back seat?
Driver's side back seat.
Okay.
He was just looking up like this. And I didn't think anything of it. Maybe he's just like shocked and scared. 45 minutes later, we get a call from the COC that there was one CIVCAS. I didn't see any blood. I didn't see anything that would have represented a casualty. Well, one of those bullets is what the investigation came out to be. One of those bullets came off the ground, ricocheted into the windshield, somehow ricocheted into that rear driver's side passenger through his eyeball, like straight perfect bullseye shot through his eyeball, killed him. And we're like, holy crap, how did that happen? You know, and then the jokes start coming around. Oh, you guys got a 1 in a million shot on a ricochet. Like, but it's like, holy crap, like we just killed this dude. We don't know if he's for sure Taliban. So we go through this investigation. I remember getting back that night and immediately a JAG comes out and a JAG's talking to us, put us under investigation. And it made me bitter because I'm like, dude, you guys expect us to do this job. And the greatest casualty of war is civilians, yes. But you guys expect us to do this job so perfectly that we are willing to put our lives at risk even more. Like, it just didn't make sense to me. It didn't make sense that they were wanting their politics to outweigh the safety of Marines. And it made me bitter because I was like, dude, say these guys were about to click off a bomb and it would have killed all of us because we were too hesitant to do something that could save all of our lives. And it didn't change our mentality. Like, it didn't change my mentality at all. I was like, if I go to jail because I'm keeping my Marines safe, I'm going to jail because of that. Like, I'm not going to live with myself if something bad happens.
Well, and you got protocol, right? Pin flares, warning shots, interpreters, giving them, a megaphone. People are stupid.
Yeah.
We see this especially in situations like that. But you do all you could do, and then you have to follow.
Yeah.
The escalation of force.
Yeah, we were found innocent. Okay. Everything was cleared. I have my thoughts on why we didn't get certain awards because of that incident that night. But I didn't join the Marine Corps to get a bunch of awards. I joined the Marine Corps because I love the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
So one of my last missions, it was a crazy night. I felt whenever you're in a war zone, you can feel the presence of demonic activity. And that night specifically, I really felt the presence of demonic activity. I felt like that demon in Afghanistan, like I was going to see that demon.
I've heard a lot of people say that, and me personally too. I used to tell mom would say, I'm praying for you. I'm like, and this is, the time that I didn't have a relationship with God in my life. And I was like, what are you praying for? Like, God's not here. Like I thought, but I really mistaken the presence of evil with the absence of God. And there's like a tangible feeling in Afghanistan, other places I've been in the world, but a real tangible presence, like sense and feeling of a presence of evil.
Yeah, that you could feel it. It makes your arm hair stand up.
Yeah.
So we went on this road, and you see people out and about doing their thing. This was at night. You see people out and about doing their thing, and you know when someone's just doing their thing. And then you know when someone is up to something nefarious. like a few months before this. We went through this area where the Taliban had taken over a checkpoint and they stole all the ANA's uniforms and weapons and stuff. We rolled through this area and I was 5 feet away from this dude that was a Taliban that like commandeered all this ANA's guy's stuff. And he had his black mascara on and him and I are looking at each other. I had a 50 cal, he had a 240. Him and I are staring each other in the eyes with fingers on the triggers, like about to smoke each other. And I don't know why that night we didn't get into something with them. I think they knew that they would have all been obliterated within a really quick amount of time. I think they were wanting to get some more ANA outposts first. But I remember being like, this is evil. Like I'm looking at that Taliban fighter in the eye right now, and I could see the presence of evil. And so, like I said, a few weeks later, I'm on that patrol, and we're coming down this road. And this is right in front of the gate that you came in through in Bagram.
Yeah.
And so basically you have the big bazaar out there. You have the big city circle, which is just insane in the day. There's this guy that pops out. And then basically like, it was almost like he popped out of nowhere. It gives me chills thinking about it. He had this thing over his head, like almost like a robe. He looked like he was Satan from Passion of the Christ. Like, you know, when Jesus is in the Garden of Yosemite praying and Satan comes out and he's got the snake.
Yeah,
like,
he's got that dark robe just over his head.
Exactly what he looked like. And I was like, holy crap. So I got the handy dandy old green laser and I'm shining it on his eyes. And his head is down and he looks me directly into the laser. And he's just staring at me, doesn't move. I'm like, I know this guy's not a Taliban. I know this guy's not a Taliban at all. And that's like one of the only times I could say that. And so I'm looking at this dude and I'm just kind of shocked. I'm like, this guy's not even moving. And then his mouth opens like super big and he just starts letting out this insane scream, like this super deep, dark scream that sounded almost like a lion and like a bee's nest mixed together, like just screaming at me. I'm like, dude, like, this is insane. Like, we're going to run you over or I'm going to shoot you. And then he puts the robe back over his head and goes into the shadow. And I look into this area like where he went into and he's not there. And I'm like, there's the demon that I feel like has been chasing me. That was one of the most like surreal moments of seeing evil, like seeing the face of actual evil. And so we move on to a different position that night and we had our QRF out. Usually they're on base, but they came out this night.
On the quick reaction force, which would be respond to any emergencies to go, recover people or or equipment.
Yeah.
People or equipment.
We were coming up on them and April 2019 when the 3 Marines were killed, the way that the VBID hit the Max Pro was that there was a side road. So in Texas, we have feeder roads on the highway, right?
Yeah.
So there's a side road on the road that we were on. And that vehicle, I saw that vehicle was behind our patrol. It was trailing us for about 15 miles. It came around us on the side road, and where that side road meets out was where we would cross. And he was hauling butt, like quick. I knew that it was like, this was the VBID. I knew that this guy was up to no good. And so I unloaded on him. Until he stopped. And so eliminated the threat.
Where'd you fire into the vehicle?
So I led the vehicle I was on his hood. I was keeping it on his hood, and then I did a spray across the side of the windows. And so vehicle comes to a stop. I see it like come to a really fast stop where the dust comes around it. And at that point, I was like, all right, I just took out a vehicle. What do I do? So I hop on the radio, and I'm like, hey, there's that vehicle that was trailing us, popped out on that side road, came out, was accelerating at a high rate of speed. It was going to meet us up at the crossing just up the road where the QRF was staged. The officer that was in charge of that convoy, Major Sags, he just picked up Lieutenant Colonel. He's still in. He's like, copy. Like, let's just continue pushing. And so this guy was a really, really solid mentor of mine in the Marine Corps. Him and I weren't in ANGLICO together. He was part of the Georgian liaison team. So he was a 03 officer. Just a great man of God, like loved his family more than anything and loved his Marines. So he'd always have my back if something ever came up like that. eliminated that threat and went back home that night. And it was crazy to me to think, like, I just eliminated this VBID. I go back and it's like a normal thing. And I'm going to go back home in a few months and I'm going to be sitting at home doing nothing like this anymore. You know, it wasn't any crazy kinetic, like banging, singing type of stories within my deployment, but it was like, we know that there's VBIDs out here trying to kill us and they're everywhere. We were prepared for it. Our team did really good. Our team coordinated a lot of really good airstrikes. We were a really solid group of dudes. And I think the best thing that came out of this deployment, and one of the things that'll be with me my entire life, is the brotherhood that I created there. 3 of my best friends, Brendan, Aiden, and Steve. And all 3 of these guys grew up within 15 minutes from each other. And I was kind of the outcast that grew up in Texas. And none of them knew each other before they joined the Marine Corps. When they got to the Marine Corps, obviously they became friends. We all got into the same brigade and worked together. And we all grew up very similar, and we all came from Christian backgrounds. And so there's a lot of great brotherhood stories that come out of the military.
Yeah.
But I think ours is one of the most unique because we weren't the Marines that were like the Till Valhalla type of guys. We were the Marines that were on our knees praying for God's protection and guidance and favor before every single mission. If something happened at home with one of our families or some personal challenges, like, we were in prayer together. We were doing Bible studies together. Like, it was like a modern day, like, Christian night back in the day. Like, we were like very, very, very connected, and we still are to this day. I mean, we do a reunion every year with each other. That's a guarantee. But I was just out there 3 weeks ago. Like, we're all together. So like the bond and brotherhood was great, but that bond and brotherhood strengthened by God himself made our relationship so much more. I'm so thankful for that. That's the most amazing thing that I gained out of the Marine Corps and from that deployment.
Yeah. So between your active time and reserves time, you done 8 years in the Marine Corps. Right now, 2024 is one of the most difficult times for the military recruiting since Vietnam, since the draft in Vietnam. Like, our recruiting numbers are so down. You've had a good and bad experiences in the Marine Corps. Everybody that served in the military has good and bad experiences. Yeah. There's all kinds of stuff going on around the world. But in this all-time low of recruiting, what would you say to young men and women who are interested in joining the military but hesitant? Whatever reason they're hesitant because of these recruiting numbers, what would you say to them?
Yeah, so I would always encourage people to join the military. It's the most selfless thing you can do, and especially to serve your country. JFK says, not ask what your country can do for you, but what you can do for it. And I'm not saying that we need some law that requires everybody to serve 2 years. I think that would be a great thing if everybody did serve 2 years. It would give a lot more appreciation for the freedoms of our country, because there's not a lot of countries like ours. But I would definitely say to someone that is hesitant on joining the military, are you hesitant because it's politics, or are you hesitant because you're afraid of dying? Everybody that I talk to that says they almost joined the military, or I didn't want to join the military because I didn't want to go to war and die. Well, guess what? There's a lot of jobs that you can do in the military that don't even involve combat. Yeah. Even in the Marine Corps. And so you could find your niche. If you want to go to the military to learn a trade that you can use into the civilian world, free training. Yeah. Like, if you have a college degree and you want to go become a pilot, go become a fighter pilot in the military, and you get a job with the airlines or get a job flying for someone else. But my encourage is to put the politics aside, because yes, I will be honest right now, it is hard being in the military because of the politics, but put the politics aside and see how you can serve your country, because we still are the greatest nation on the planet, even with our challenges, but use that to help you grow. Yeah, lots of life experience come from your time from serving in the military. You learn so much, you get so much of a perspective. You're outside of the American bubble of just looking at, kind of your life in America, and you could just learn so much, get so much free education and job skills and just character traits and so many things. So I definitely am one to encourage young men and women to serve and join and get that experience. So a big part of what I do at Mighty Oaks is speaking on resiliency. This show, the Resilience Show,
carries the same mantra of mind, body, spirit, social, like being mentally tough, being physically tough, having a strong social network, and having a strong spiritual pillar. These are things that I believe are essential for not just combat, but everyday life. One of the things I've always talked about when I've talked about you to other people is that, especially as you were going to Afghanistan, I'm like, I actually have a little bit of peace about Hunter going to Afghanistan because I believe he has a strong spiritual foundation. And like I said, I've spoken so many times to so many troops, and I really believe that, if you're strong physically, strong mentally, even if you're around the right people, if you don't have a strong spiritual foundation, things like combat, traumatic events, life could rock you and take you off course. But what would you say about your spiritual foundation, your spiritual pillar, and how that helped you through what you experienced in Afghanistan and moving out of Afghanistan into life?
Yeah, I think the spiritual pillar is probably the most important, because without that, your whole foundation kind of shakes. It says it in the Bible. And so I think throughout Afghanistan, I knew truth. I knew what was right and what was not right. I went to Bible college, learned a lot about the Bible there. And
you didn't even mention that. You went to Calvary Chapel Bible College.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I was one of the rougher students there, but
yeah,
it worked out well. But the spiritual pillar for me is the most important, because it's not only for times that are hard, but times that are good. Mm-hmm. And especially in Afghanistan, there was a lot of hard times there within Afghanistan and stuff going on back home. And if my spiritual pillar was not solid, I think my whole foundation would have came crumbling down.
Yeah. Such an important lesson and a staple to the show. Hey, we're gonna get back to it here in a second. We're gonna talk about like your job at Mighty Oaks International. But before we do, I want to take a quick break. In 2007, I came home from my 8th and last deployment from Afghanistan. I dealt with debilitating panic attacks, anxiety, depression, and a very real battle with taking my own life and becoming another veteran suicide statistic. Amazing people came around me and helped me to get well. On the other side of that decision to get well, which included a restoration of my faith, becoming a Christian, and really understanding how to live my life in the life I was created to live through new purpose, I discovered a deep burden inside of me, and that burden was to pay it forward, to take the lessons of hardship, the lessons of moving forward, and pay it forward to the next person. That manifested in the founding of Mighty Oaks Foundation. That was almost 15 years ago, and over the last 15 years, we've been able to serve over 500,000 warriors through resiliency programs at Mighty Oaks. Our recovery program, our legacy program, has over 6,000 graduates. This year, we'll serve over 1,000 people at our recovery programs and pay for every single active duty service member, veteran, first responder, and spouse that wants to attend, including airfare for their travel. Mighty Oaks is an incredible organization with an incredible team. I still am the founder. They have such an amazing team there that allows me to be able to do things like bring this show to you, travel and speak and advocate for Mighty Oaks and advocate for veterans care at places around the world. In addition to the recovery programs, Mighty Oaks goes to Washington, D.C., and I testify before Congress and Senate. I've spoken to presidents to make sure that our military warriors have the option to have faith-based care. The last thing that Mighty Oaks does is international programs. Go around the world to our allied partners and take those same principles and programs that we have here for our U.S. service members and make them available to our allied partners around the world. If you or someone you know is struggling with anxiety, depression, PTSD, suicide ideations, anything that may be related to your role in the military or as a first responder or a spouse of, contact mightyoaksprograms.org and get plugged in today. You don't have to do it alone. You were never meant to do it alone, and Mighty Oaks is here to support you. If you want a great organization to support, mightyoaksprograms.org needs your support. We'll do $8 million in programming for free this year to our military and first responder communities, and we need your help to do it. Our warriors deserve a grateful nation to welcome them home and provide the support they need to move forward in their lives that they were created to live. Thank you. Guys, I'm a lifelong athlete. I've tried all kinds of things, from every different diet, from all different supplements, tons of different things to make my body as healthy and as functional as possible. I don't like taking just random supplements off the shelf. It just is either short-lived or just not good for my overall health. So I look for natural things that are actually bioavailable to my body. I heard about BioPro years ago from jiu-jitsu athletes, from UFC fighters, and they're all friends of mine who I trust that were telling me, you have to try a BioPro, and I did. I experienced a had tremendous results, mostly in my sleep, to where I was sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night, to where I immediately went to sleeping 9 hours a night. BioPro has helped my recovery, my mental focus. There's a daytime formula, there's a nighttime formula. You could take one or both. I am a believer. I love it, or I would not be promoting it. If you're interested, go to bioproteintech.com and get yours today. Okay, we're back. Your job at Mighty Oaks is the director of Mighty Oaks International. That's your job at Mighty Oaks Foundation, director of international programs. And, everybody knows about Mighty Oaks. Everybody that does know Mighty Oaks primarily knows about Mighty Oaks for the work we do with the military and first responder communities, our resiliency programs, our recovery programs at the ranches. We do a lot of advocacy work in D.C. We just had Jeremy Stolnecker, who's the new CEO, on a recent episode, kind of doing our annual Mighty Oaks episode that we're going to do for the Resilient Show. But not a lot of people really understand what Mighty Oaks does internationally, and you're the director of that. And so tell us specifically what you and your team do at Mighty Oaks International.
Yeah, so we go into countries that we see need assistance in training their chaplains and pastors. Mm-hmm. And the most recent country that we've been involved in is Ukraine. Obviously, we've been involved in Ukraine since the beginning of the invasion, and we were there a little bit before that doing some resiliency stuff. What we are doing right now is we are connecting into these Ukrainian chaplain networks that involve the pastors who are going to the front lines and speaking to these soldiers on topics of resiliency. We are equipping those pastors and those chaplains, volunteer chaplains, I should say, and some official chaplains of the Ukrainian military. We're equipping them with the right tools and the right words to say to these men who are just dealing with the effects of combat, and specifically them fighting on their own turf. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I was really impressed with that you and the team did, and we're going to get more into Ukraine, but that there was these group of pastors who had congregation members or members from their community that got drafted or conscripted, ended up going to the front lines, and these pastors are like, hey, I want to go serve my people from my community, but I don't know how to poop in the woods. I don't know how to live in the woods. Yeah. If I don't want to be a burden on the military, like I don't know anything about first aid or anything like that, much less how to chaplain, how to actually speak about combat. And so you led a team into Ukraine to teach all those things, including like TCCC and combat casualty care and basic first aid and all those things. And essentially through Mighty Oaks certified about 300 pastors to chaplains. And I was, it was one of the things I was super proud of you of and our team of being able to do at Mighty Oaks International. And by the way, so people know, like when Hunter says going to different countries around the world, these are allied partners, people that we would say are friends of America.
Yeah, and definitely not a hostile nation towards the United States.
Yeah.
Now, if we run into a Russian in Ukraine that's like a POW, obviously, like just because of his nationality doesn't mean we're not going to minister to him.
Yeah.
But we are not actively going into places like that are hostile against the U.S. We're not working with those governments. We're working with people that are friendly with America, especially if we're working with their military.
Yeah. Awesome. A lot of people, I've received this, and I'm sure you have too, a lot of people are critical about international work right now because of America, like all this stuff that's going on. People would say, hey, what are you out doing international humanitarian work when there's homeless veterans in America, when there's sex trafficking in America, when there's addictions? Look at the southern border. Why aren't you out working on the southern border? I've had this come up a lot. My thing is, can we do both? Right?
Yeah.
Can we? There's a lot of need out there, but we don't have to just pick one. But what would you say to those critics?
So in Matthew 28:18, it says to go out amongst all of the nations and make disciples. Right. Mm-hmm. So we see that Jesus is saying in Matthew 28:18, he's not saying go into Houston, Texas and make disciples. He's saying go amongst all nations. Mm-hmm. And I think what is important to take away from that is that your calling can be to do ministry on the streets of Houston. If that's your calling, run with that calling. If your calling is to do work internationally in areas of conflict, follow that calling. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with doing ministry 5 minutes away from your house compared to doing ministry 25 hours away from your house. There's nothing wrong with that. God has no boundaries. It doesn't say in the Bible, like, you can only do it here and there.
Right.
Like, it depends on what God has called you to do. If you're a person that doesn't have a relationship with Christ and you're a person that just wants to help a community, if you feel like helping your community, help your community. If you feel like helping someone overseas, help them. Everybody needs help. There's tons of opportunities to do it. And there's no right or wrong answer to it. If you don't want to go to Ukraine and go to the front lines and do stuff there, I don't blame you. It's a crazy area. Like, you got to really be a little crazy to do it. But you got to really have a calling to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And, my first question is, I've got a lot. What are you down in Ukraine? Like, what about being at the southern border? I'm like, why don't you go to the southern border? Like, like, you're the one that seems to care about the southern border, which I do too, by the way. But but I'm like, if you really care about it so much, you think I should be at the southern border. Why aren't you at the southern border? And usually these people are not people that are doing anything themselves. Most of the critics. Why is it important for Americans to serve internationally specifically?
So Americans, or
even is it?
Yeah.
I'm asking that question as it is. Like, I'm assuming it is, but I believe it is important for Americans. But
yeah, so I think it's important because we have a lot of luxuries here that a lot of countries don't have, and we have a lot of freedoms that a lot of countries don't have, specifically travel. Like, to kind of get into some political stuff, the U.S. passport has a lot of power. If you're a citizen of Georgia, the country, you have to get a U.S. visa to come to the United States. So we have a lot of power with our U.S. passport of being really able to travel anywhere within the world. Obviously, there are some countries that you need visas to get into on your U.S. passport, but for the most part, it's pretty easy being a U.S. citizen to travel anywhere. So we have the ability to travel freely. We have the blessing of having more financial resources. We have a very big economy, so medical-wise, we can get donations for medical equipment. We can really fly anywhere around the globe from our east or west coast. Like, we're in a very good spot to be able to help. And I think the biggest thing that hinders people from wanting to do these types of things in our world is being comfortable. Everybody loves being comfortable. Like, I love being comfortable. I set my AC at 67 degrees every night and have a really nice bed.
I know I used to pay for your electric bill.
Yeah, now I pay for it.
Yeah.
But being comfortable hinders a lot of people from doing uncomfortable things.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of hinders a lot of Americans from doing this type of international work, whether that is ministry or humanitarian aid.
Yeah, I know Ukraine, after my 10 trips to Ukraine's not very comfortable sleeping outside. It's wet, but it's very cold there. I think your last trip to Ukraine was pretty cold, right?
Yeah, snowing the entire time.
Yeah. So again, like I'm familiar with you being my son, and you love the comfort, but I've also seen you. I remember because I took you hunting since you were like 5-6 years old and teaching you gun safety and hunting. But I remember the first time that I let you hunt on your own. Yeah, you're pretty young, and I remember dropping you off in a particular spot to hunt deer. Put you in this hide to hunt deer, and it was really, really cold. And leaving you there in the morning, and waiting for the sun to rise, and so that's one of the first times me and Hayden I took Hayden, your brother, and we were in another, and we were body to body, like staying warm, and I'm thinking like, oh man, Hunter's got to be freezing right now. And so you've loved comfort, but you've also been uncomfortable going into places like Ukraine and going into places like around the world to do these international missions. You're choosing to give up the comforts of here to go do that. Yeah. But what is it that compels you to do that? Because you're saying that's a obstacle for a lot of people. What is it compels you to give up those comforts and go serve?
Well, first of all, I know it's God's calling on my life.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't do this if it wasn't God's calling on my life.
Yeah.
In all honesty, I do these things so that, number one, I glorify the kingdom of God. Mm-hmm. It's not about me. It's not about the money. It's not about the fame. It's about what I can do for the kingdom. There is a lot of discomfort in this, whether that be physical discomfort or going in front of people that I don't speak the same language as and trying to make myself not look like an idiot when I'm speaking to a Ukrainian military general or someone that's within the government. There's a lot of discomfort in it, but I know that putting myself out there, I know that following God's calling in my life will get rid of all that discomfort at the end of the day.
Yeah. And just the mere fact for me is just being able to help people that can't help themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, I know if I'd be in a vulnerable situation and my family would be, and we're in a situation like that, I'd be praying or hoping someone would come help me. And if we're in a position to help, that's for me, it's compels me to go help people that are in such a dire situation that they just need it. It's a need. And if you have the ability, I've said this a lot and you've heard me say it a lot, if you have the ability to help someone in need and you can, then you should.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But what is it? The quote that said, "For evil to prevail requires good men to do nothing."
That's right. For only thing for evil to triumph in this world is for good men to do nothing and just sit in their hands while people are suffering.
Yeah.
It's just not okay with me.
Yeah.
And it really makes me happy. Again, that to see my son, willing to go into discomfort and put yourself in those situations and sacrifice yourself to help, people less fortunate. Afghanistan withdrawal. August 2021, the United States withdraws from Afghanistan. President Biden makes that
heinous mistake.
Heinous decision. It was something I highly disagreed with. I've been very verbal about it, wrote a book about it, Saving Aziz. Been on tons of media about it. I made the decision to go back to get Aziz, my friend and my interpreter, and to get his wife and 6 kids. Start putting together a team together to go. I'm at home, like burning the midnight oil, like planning this operation, and you come up to me and you're like, I want to get involved. I want to go. And I'm like, pretty much blew you off. And you had to remind me like, hey, I'm not just your son. I know you're your son, but I'm also a Marine. I'm a combat veteran. I'm an Afghanistan veteran. And I had an interpreter, and it's important to me too. And I had to make the decision then to say, okay, yeah, you're right. I need to let you be involved in the Afghanistan evacuations. But you and I both know that I probably would have never let you go as long as I had control, let you go into Afghanistan and took you and I flew together. We went to Abu Dhabi. We flew to Dubai, traveled to Abu Dhabi, set up the operations center there for the evacuations. And you played a very crucial role in the logistical side of the evacuations. Ultimately, got Aziz, his wife, 6 kids out. We got 17,000 people out. Towards the end, there was an opportunity for me to go into Tajikistan and help build routes out across the Panjshir River to get women and children out of Afghanistan across the Panjshir River. I took one other person with me, Dennis Price. You wanted to come on that too. And I had to have a conversation with you saying, hey, like I cannot take my son into Tajikistan to swim across the river in Afghanistan. My mind will be focused on keeping my son safe. And I'm all about to be focused on the operation. And you graciously understood my position as much as you wanted to go and supported my decision in that. But it had to be hard.
I think the whole situation was just crazy from beginning to end.
Yeah.
And it still hasn't seemed like it's ended totally because not all of our allies are out of the country.
Right.
But yeah, I remember when we were talking about this, I would get updates almost every day or a few times a week asking about Aziz, asking what the details were, constantly trying to figure out a way that I could wiggle my way into getting involved.
Yeah.
And when we got there and everything started to happen really fast, people started to come to the humanitarian city in Abu Dhabi, from us sitting down in front of all those lawyers and generals apologizing on behalf of our country that we were having to come to them. It was just like a very life-altering moment because it was like, I'm not in a room with a bunch of Lance Corporals. I'm in a room with like military leaders from a foreign country.
Ministry of Interior, royal family.
Like these people have enough like money and political power to do whatever they want. And we're here like basically on our hands and knees asking for some help. And so it's a really, really cool thing to be a part of. I wish I could have did some things differently. I wish I could, like I'd still beat myself in the foot every day about not going to Tajikistan. I wish I would have went, but God had me where he wanted me at that time. Yeah. It happened. But, like looking back at that whole thing, it's just like one of the craziest situations that I've ever seen happen in the world, in world history. And being able to be a part of that was something that I'll never take for granted. If I'm correct, we did probably the biggest humanitarian aid rescue in civilized history. It was the largest civilian-led rescue mission in American history. Yeah, it's crazy to think about. You're part of it. I mean, a lot of people, if you read the book Saving Aziz, you'll hear some of Hunter's role, but, you and the team in Abu Dhabi, Sean Lee and
Joe Roberts, huge part. I mean, did just phenomenal work, and other people in Abu Dhabi. I'm leaving tons of people out, but and then Aziz gets out, and you end up working with Aziz. So you heard about Aziz your whole life, being my interpreter, and I say interpreter, but really my teammate and all my deployments. You heard about Aziz your whole life. You knew who he was, and now you work with him, like because he comes to the humanitarian center immediately. He takes over the whole thing, and as far as like the Afghan side, and so you're getting to work with my old.
Yeah, it's crazy working with Aziz because I grew up hearing stories about Aziz, and then now we go to programs together and I can hear him snoring through a wall.
Yeah, he's a snorer. Yeah. So, I really wanted to say that to set up that Afghanistan evacuations were a big part of you and I's professional relationship working together. You want to go into Afghanistan. Me as a dad, and I believe justifiably said, I can't focus on what I'm going to do on the ground with my son there. And I made the decision I'd take you. And again, I know that had to hurt at the time. It would have hurt me. But we move into February 24th of 2022. Am I right on the date?
February 24th, I think. It's 24th or 25th.
Yeah, 2022, which was that's the day that Vladimir Putin ordered Russian forces to cross the eastern Ukrainian border and invade Ukraine in what's been a 3-year war between Russia and Ukraine that has ended the lives of, I would estimate, some people would say I'm overestimating. I would say I'm definitely probably grossly underestimating 1 million deaths.
Yeah, I would say it's probably close to that with the casualties on both the Ukrainian and Russian side.
Yeah, a million deaths and civilian deaths. And, what people have to realize that aren't following the Ukrainian wars, this wasn't what you or I seen in Afghanistan. This isn't a tribal terror organization. This is a first world military superpower invading another first world nation, Ukraine, and rolling in with not AK-47s and RPG rocket-propelled grenade launchers, but ballistic missiles the size of telephone poles, flying them into the side of civilian apartment buildings and high-rise buildings. And this is the type of war we're talking about: military and military with first world state-of-the-art technology.
Yeah, you have a nuclear-powered military. They are able to reach us from their country.
Insane. So you find out that I'm going to go. Sea Spray, those who don't know Sea Spray, big part of the Afghan evacuations, former special forces soldier who turned CIA ground branch operator, big part of our Afghanistan effort, great friend and humanitarian, who works with us. He's already on the ground in Ukraine. I'm talking to him. Russia crossed the border. He's there when Russia crossed the border and says, hey, you need to get over here. So I start planning to go. Originally, I planned on taking you. We're going to bring a little team together, and then end up being just me going. And then you're asking to go at that time, and I'm like, I don't think it's a good idea to take my son in Ukraine with me. And I want to say that's where this book really steps in. Mm-hmm. So the book Mission Without Borders really steps in because my decision to say, hey, I don't think I want to take my son with me was based on something that I have to confess, and I confess it deeply in this book, and I confess it to you. My decision to stop you from coming to Ukraine was based on my own fear, and something I battle with a lot is my desire to control circumstances. And so that's what this book to me is mostly about, my desire to control circumstances and keep you safe. And so the transition from that moment to you going to Ukraine and leading 30 missions there, going there 13 times yourself, going past the Russian border in Ukraine, the transition of that was me coming to the realization that as much as I love you, God loves you more.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing as well. As much as I love you as a father, God loves you more. And as much as I want to protect you as a father, God can protect you more. You could be sitting on your couch here in Texas, or you could be in a Russian war zone in eastern Ukraine and be equally safe, because there's no safer place to be in the planet. And I really believe this. There's no safer place to be in the planet than in the will of God. You could die anywhere. Mm-hmm. If you're in the middle of God's will, then you're exactly where you're supposed to be, even if that means death. But as a father, that's a really hard thing to come to. One of the way this book opens in the prologue is you and I simultaneously in two different Russian-controlled cities getting bombed at the same time. So the book kind of starts there with us being under indirect fire. And then we go backwards to me making the decision fearfully not to let you come in. So I want to kick it over to you and say, like, why did you have a desire to come with me? Afghanistan, clearly you were in Afghanistan. There's a desire. Why did you have a desire? You wasn't working for Mighty Oaks International at the time. What made you desire to want to come with me?
Yeah, so as you'll read in the book, when I was 6 years old, I had a dream, and probably the only dream that I remember from my childhood. And this dream was something that wouldn't come to light for years. And it was you and I in a country, and we were doing some sort of humanitarian aid. We were in an area.
But you would have knew it to be a humanitarian aid at that time.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Now I know it.
Yeah.
You and I were in this area. There was these bad guys chasing these people down, women in burqas. And for those of you who don't know what burqas are, it's what traditional clothing in the Middle East is for women to cover all of their skin. And so these women are running from these bad guys. They're shooting at them. They're shooting at us. We have no weapons, but we're running to these people and rescuing them. You can read more about it in the book. But that dream right there is what fueled the fire for me to do really international work. I believe that was the first sign of God's calling on my life to do this type of stuff. But I'm not going to sit here and say that I wasn't scared to do something like that. I knew that there was going to be some fear involved in it. I knew that there was going to be some fear of stepping into the unknown and being uncomfortable. But I knew that this was what God was calling me to do, especially at this time with Afghanistan and Ukraine. And I look at my Bible, and I have this Bible has been with me through everything, through my deployment in Afghanistan to the rescue operations in Afghanistan, and every single one of my Ukraine trips, this Bible has been on my body. And there's verses that I highlight in here that like I think of when I'm scared or when things are going on. And so when I was getting ready for this podcast, I was like, I want to go through some stuff that I've had in this Bible that I've kind of relied upon. And so in 1 Timothy 1:7, it says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." And so I look back on that situation of getting involved in Ukraine. And yeah, I was scared. I had fear in my heart, but I knew what God's calling was, and I knew what God's word says, that God did not give us a spirit of fear. God gave us basically a spirit to go forward, to rely upon him. And that's what I did. That's why I felt like this was something that I needed to be involved in.
And for those who are fathers there, even moms listening, one of the other things I had to reconcile was God's burdened my heart to do certain things, and God's called me to do, and I have desires and ambitions and things I feel compelled to do. And I had to really come to the realization, who am I to get in the way of the things that God burdens your heart for? Mm-hmm. And it had to be a time that I had to step aside, and it sounds easy to do, but very difficult, and even more difficult to do in a situation of bringing your son into combat.
Yeah.
And so, the reality is I pumped the brakes on allowing you to be involved. I get to Ukraine and in Krakow, Poland, where Sea Spray and I were operating out of, and we immediately identified some needs to set up some communication network there, and I won't get into the whole detail of that. You can read in the book. But that created a need to get several $100,000 in equipment that need to be purchased from multiple locations in the United States quickly into Krakow, Poland, to put in our operation. I got the money together really quick. I was able to raise a few $100,000 to get that in a matter of like a day or two, because we have just such amazing people that support our operations. And then I knew that I could trust you in the comms department, because you're so good with communications equipment and some of this stuff. And I knew I could trust you to get it there. So I just called you and said, "Hey, you still want to be involved?" And you're like, "Yeah, what do I have to do?" And I'm like, "I need you to buy all this stuff, this couple of $100,000 worth of stuff, fly around the country, get it, pack it up, and get it here by yourself," because I didn't want a lot of people to be involved and know what we were doing. And I think 3 days later, you showed up with, how many duffel bags?
Yeah, a lot
It was
of
like
bags.
12 or 14, I think, duffel bags.
It was a lot
of equipment, $300,000 worth of equipment, and you show up, and then we get those equipment laid out, and we go tag it. And I'm like, "All right, you're turning around going home." And Sea Spray's like, "Are you gonna set up this equipment?" I'm like, "No, I'm not setting up." He's like, and you're like, "I'll set it up." And so you stayed up the next few days setting up this equipment. And at the end of that, I think Sea Spray and I both realized you were essential. Part of the team, and it was necessary to have you there. And you built our TOC, our Tactical Operations Center, pulled that comms equipment into play. Basically, we had TV screens out and able to track equipment and assets and resources, and amazing to watch you put that together. I know when you first came, Sea Spray was calling you FedEx because you're the FedEx guy that got this stuff to us real quick. And he's like, "Hey, I think his name's not FedEx anymore. He's really playing a good role here."
Yeah.
And it was a significant thing happened. And again, all the details are in the book, but we were all in our house in Krakow, Poland, 9 of us, everybody just kind of having conversation, having fun. They got orchestrated a miracle in that moment because we had realized in order to get around Ukraine and go rescue people, you had to have what we call access and placement. You have to be able to get to where people need to be rescued, and they had curfews and checkpoints. And the one thing we realized is, hey, how do you get access and placement in place to have curfews and checkpoints? Well, you need to be medical personnel. That's what gets passed. So we're like, okay, we need ambulances. We need to look like EMTs, so we need EMT uniforms. We need EMT paperwork to be medical people, and we need IDs and badges and put a stamp on it, and everybody thinks it's legit. And literally, we had got this in place 1 hour or so before we got a call to go do this very important rescues. And I believe God orchestrated that timing. But we're all in the house, and Seaspray gets a call. He puts the phone up to his ear. He holds his hand up for everyone to be quiet while he's talking. Everyone's like, okay, this is an important call. The call was actually from the Pentagon. And he puts the phone down, and he gets everybody's attention, and he says, okay, there's an American Fox News reporter, Benjamin Hall, who is catastrophically wounded and may or may not live. His team is killed. Sasha, the local correspondent, has been killed. Pierre Zaszewski, who's a 25-year Fox cameraman, has been killed. The security team's killed. But they have Benjamin Hall in a Ukrainian hospital, and they don't know if he's going to live or die. But he's, we know now he had lost his foot, part of his leg, a hand, which they reattached, his eye. He had shrapnel through his throat. His brain was hemorrhaging and bleeding and swelling. He was in bad shape. And I remember Seaspray saying he has a wife and little girl at home, a wife and 2 little girls at home. The American military or our government intelligence agencies, the CIA, are not allowed by the White House to cross the border. And so no one's going to get him. And if we don't cross the border to go get him, he's going to die. Who's in? And everybody, 9 people in that room, raised their hand, including you. And including most of the guys were military soft guys, but there was one guy that wasn't a military guy there, Adam LaRoche, baseball player, a famous baseball player. He just happened to be there having dinner. And he's like, I'll go. And everybody raised their hand to go. And one of the things that I think is super significant for people listening to know about that moment is no one knew Benjamin Hall. No one knew his family. In that moment, Kiev was under attack. The Russians were surrounding it. They were firing rockets into the city and building. They had military troops advancing on foot, small arms fire, indirect fire, like everything. It was a siege of Kiev, and anyone who was looking at that would have believed that Kiev was going to fall that night. I did. We believed that Kiev was going to fall that night.
And it was completely surrounded.
Yeah. So the decision was made by people who didn't know Benjamin to go get Benjamin Hall, who may or may not live, to get him back to his wife and kids, to go into Kiev knowing that it was going to probably fall that night. And I think that's a significant thing. It makes me so proud to have been in a room amongst all those people, including yourself. And everybody's like, I'm in. Let's go get him. And people started moving and doing what they have to do to prepare operation. Plans are putting in place. Gear's getting loaded, and the operation center is getting set up, and everybody's moving. And I remember seeing you with your duffel bag or your backpack, throwing it in the back of one of those vehicles and thinking, I guess Hunter's coming. And you may or may not believe me still, but Seaspray pulled me aside. Seaspray and Bo pulled me aside and said, hey, Hunter thinks he's coming. And I said, yeah, I seen him put his back in the back. And he says, I need him in a TOC. I need him in an operations center. And honestly, at that moment, I didn't make the decision for you not to go, but I was kind of relieved because I'm like, we don't know what's going to happen. And I just wasn't ready for you to go yet. And so I was kind of relieved. I'm like, I can't tell him because if I tell him, he's going to think that I'm his dad trying to stop him from coming. Seaspray's like, I'll tell him. And he really truly needed you in the operations center because you had set up all that equipment. You were going to work with Sean. You and Sean were going to stay and kind of man the operation from there, track our movement, and also be the liaison for the CIA's solo special operations liaison officer who came sit in the TOC with you guys. I won't say who that is, but that actually, so you and him and kind of manning that. And then we rolled go across the border. We get Benjamin Hall. You see Spray's team gets him, brings him across the border, hands him off across the border. On the Polish side, the 82nd Airborne was waiting. We were coordinating through the Pentagon with the military. Hand him off to the 82nd Airborne. For those that don't know the story from there, they fly him to Aeromedical Unit. Aeromedical C-130 flies him to Launchstool, Germany. From Launchstool, Germany, he gets emergency surgery and then gets to Brooke Army Medical Center where he's, alive and well now. And it's an amazing story of this rescue. And then we also are asked to go back and get Pierre Zaszewski's body, which I said no, because Kiev's still going to fall. There was a secondary wave of attack, and we're not going to go back for a body. And his wife, Michelle, came in and said, I want my husband. And we said, yes, ma'am. And she came into Poland, and we went across and got Pierre's body. I actually drove Pierre's body out myself, and you were still manning the TOC. I could not imagine being who I know you are, which is very much like myself, and watching us drive off to do something that you were clearly a burden to do. And I've had this conversation with you, but never asked you directly. What did it feel like to get left behind when we went to get Benjamin Hall?
Yeah, so I obviously wasn't happy, but I knew that in every mission, there's certain people that have to do certain things. And for mission success, that was what was needed. And yes, it was hard for me to accept that, but I did. I didn't want to be like a dude that was throwing a temper tantrum or someone that was going to be all pissy about it, because I knew that the mission was more important. We had an American dying, and if that's where I was needed, that's where I was going to be. You know, watching you guys drive off, I was like, all right, like, God, like, I know you called me to this. Why am I having to stay back? I think every man struggles with patience and waiting on God's timing. And that wasn't God's timing for me to go into Ukraine yet. That wasn't when he wanted me to go in. And so I had to be patient. I had to lean on my own understanding. I had to wait for the time to come. I was upset because Adam came in that night and then Adam went out that night. And I was like, how's this dude just coming in and didn't even serve in the military? But I love Adam. Nothing against Adam. You know, I was just kind of butthurt about it. But I look back at it and I'm like, all right, there was certain stuff that needed to be done by me. There was certain stuff that had to be held down there. So it was all God's timing.
Yeah. And it was an important role and you did it. And, you know, I'm sure, you know, Benjamin himself is thankful for it and his family is too. So let's fast forward. This is weighing heavy on me at this time while we're there because I could see it in you. And I know, you know, the me inside of you, I'm like, he wants to go. And I make the decision to take you across the border. I say, hey, do you want to go across? And, but I wanted it to be with me and you. And so you and I go across border for the first time, go to Lviv to deliver some pretty essential supplies right after Lviv gets hit. One of the few times it's got hit by a rocket attack and you and I roll across. What was it like knowing you're going into Ukraine now?
Obviously pretty pumped. I was like, finally, like I'm able to get in to the country. I didn't come here to stay in Poland. I love Poland, but I didn't want to stay in Poland. I wanted to get into Ukraine. It was like the finally moment. Made it into there, and I was like, all right, I'm in Ukraine. Like, this is it. And Lviv isn't like some war-struck town. Like, Lviv is closer to Poland than anything. It's 45 minutes from Poland. Kyiv is 9.5 hours away from Lviv. So you feel like you're in Poland, but you can say you're in Ukraine. Yeah. And the only thing you got to worry about is long-range missiles coming in to hit the city. Yeah,
like the chance of getting hits like a meteor.
Right? Yeah.
So so going to Kyiv the first time, right? What was it like going to Kyiv the first time?
Going to Kyiv the first time, I was like, holy crap, because there were still tanks on the side of the road.
Melted.
Yeah, just completely obliterated. The city was still empty. People were still evacuating the city. It was getting hit every night in some portions of the city. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah. The first like real intense operation is us going to, we start off in Kharkiv, we end up going to Kharkiv. What was our route? Kharkiv to, what was it? Give me an itinerary. You probably remember better than me the itinerary of different towns we went to.
So we went to Kharkiv, Dnipro, Zaporizhia, and then Mykolaiv back to Kyiv.
All very hot areas.
Yeah.
I remember we're going to Kharkiv in the middle of the night, and we're driving in it's pitch black. There's
no power in this area because government orders in this area at this time of the war, and still is in this eastern part of Ukraine, is that there's no lights allowed to be on at night. So similar to the London bombings in World War II, they would all turn off their lights and electricity at night so that the Germans couldn't see lights and drop bombs on it. Yep. Same thing with Russia. Even though they have GPS stuff, you see lights, you know that there's people down there. So they were doing that in Kharkiv. So when we drove into Kharkiv, it's completely dark. The stars, I've never seen a city. Kharkiv is the second or third largest city in Ukraine. Yeah. You see this area completely pitch black. The stars in the sky are like you're in the Rocky Mountains.
It felt apocalyptic.
It was crazy.
In fact, as we're driving in, what's his name? The wrestler?
Dima.
Yeah, Dima comes across the radio. It's quiet, eerie. We're driving in, and then he says, "Welcome to Kharkiv. The only thing that lives here is Will Smith and his dog."
Yeah.
Like if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's the apocalyptic movie, zombie apocalypse movie with Will Smith and I Am Legend, and that's what it was like. It was just like buildings knocked down, rubble, no lights, and just very eerie. And we drive in. We end up going through Kharkiv, sleep in this shelter that night, get bombed in the middle of the night. The whole building shakes and windows break. We get bombed in the middle of the night, wake up the next day, and start serving. That was you guys visit some places, and then we ended up going to meet some military units and doing our medical mission, providing medical supplies and teaching them how to use it. Use those medical supplies, using that to get in to do some of our spiritual resiliency stuff that Mighty Oaks does. And that was, and that introduced us to the Safari unit, which I know you went back and spent time with the Safari unit. Yeah. Tell us about the kind of medical mission that you were leading there, because you ended up leading some of that after I was on subsequent trips after me.
Yeah. On that trip, our next stop was in Dnipro, and there wasn't too much in Dnipro going on. I kind of break this down real quick for everybody listening, but in Ukraine, you have a river that splits really the eastern portion, which is contested by Russia. It's called the Dnipro River. And on this river, you have a few major cities, two of them being Dnipro and Zaporizhia.
Which, by the way, absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, it's an amazing place. And so we made it down to Zaporizhia. And in Zaporizhia, there's a nuclear power plant, which the Russians currently still have control of. And so that's like the southern portion of the front line of the Russians. And they've kind of held that spot. They have basically the nuclear plant as a ransom. If the Ukrainians do something they don't like, they blow it. And then basically all of Europe is exposed to this fallout of this facility. So we get down to Zaporizhia, where Safari is probably about 30 miles north of the Russian front line. And Safari is living in this bunker. It's this old Soviet Union steel factory, so that all the Soviet Union posters in the factory are still up. So you have like the dude swinging the hammer. It's like crazy. You feel like it's a Call of Duty scene.
Well, I mean, when they took us and showed us the maps, and they had the nuclear targets on the maps, and they're like showing us like
every major U.S. city,
New York, Washington D.C. I'm like, holy cow,
it's crazy. Yeah. So that's been in there since the Soviet Union. So it's like stepping back in time, going into that factory. But one of the deficiencies that I was able to spot out was that these guys didn't have proper medical equipment, and they sure as heck didn't have proper medical training. Their medical training in Ukraine for their military probably isn't up to speed as the U.S. is. So we saw that as an opportunity to help them. So we had medical supplies. So we start giving out medical supplies, start teaching them how to use tourniquets correctly. A lot of the tourniquets that they had were like these fake knockoff tourniquets that they'd buy from China. And you try to twist that tourniquet on someone and it snaps.
We kind of I don't want you to undersell that, because when we say we provided medical equipment, medical training, provided the best, like what our U.S. military special operations would have.
Yeah.
We were you built the kits that slide in their vest.
Yeah, so this is even
really high level.
Before that.
Okay.
This is like when I noticed that we needed to do something like that. On that trip, I noticed that was one of the things that we needed to focus on.
Right.
We made that great relationship with Safari. I don't want to go too much into that without...
Read the book, because Safari is like a really interesting, cool unit. There would be like kind of a special operations unit with the best equipment, but they have no military training, but they're all MMA fighters and judo guys and wrestlers. And they're like the athletes of Ukraine put in the one hit squad unit with the best equipment, but no training. And
they're all Vikings.
Yeah. They're like dream team and living in this warehouse.
Like so in Ukraine, like Ukrainian history, the Cossacks are the Ukrainian Vikings. Going on to later trips with them, I would meet more Safari operators, and they would have the Cossack haircut. So they'd have the big mustache, and they'd shave their head, and they'd have that like ponytail, like Yuri in the UFC.
Yeah.
And so these guys were like straight up warriors. Like they were hardcore. And so
all cauliflower ears,
they were just
jacked, rock hard, like pretty cool guys.
They were the guys that you would want in a fight.
Yeah.
And so time goes on, go back a few more times. I finally was able to get the medical equipment to build out first aid kits to slide into a plate carrier. Being in a nonprofit ministry, like you don't have tons of money to go buy the pre-made stuff. The pre-made stuff is super expensive because it's medical stuff. It's not cheap. So we were able to get stuff for discounted prices the same equipment and build out our own. And I put the Mighty Oaks logo on all of these. So I built out 500 of these first aid kits that slip into the plate carriers. We would go to these units, specifically Safari. I'd give each one of them one of these kits, and then I'd lead some extras. But we would go through every component of that kit.
And just talk about like what type of training did we provide? Like who, like the level of training
we had SF medics. We had SARCs coming. So we had guys that were legit combat medics that knew what they were doing. Yeah, we had an Irish trauma surgeon come. These guys really taught these Ukrainians some really good medical like knowledge. They were able to take what we have given them and use it to save lives. And the medical equipment, the medical equipment that we gave out has saved lives. Yeah. Those tourniquets that we gave out have saved people from bleeding out. It's funny to think about because Aziz works for me. I told Aziz, hey, I need 500 of these packed in the next week because I'm taking off. And so Aziz got his whole family out in their kitchen and then the office packing these medical bags for us so that when we go out to Ukraine, I have the ability to give these things out. Mm-hmm. It's pretty crazy situation.
Yeah, we got an Afghan family that was rescued from Afghanistan back packing medical supplies to save Ukrainian lives on the battlefield.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So 13 of these operations. So as this progresses, there comes a point to where I go there with you. I'm taking a back seat because I'm like handoff. I'm like, okay, you're going to lead this operation. And you have high level special operations veterans on your team you're going to lead. And I'm kind of like backseat watching you do it. You plan the trip, you plan the operation. You guys are going meet some units in a place called Bakhmut, which is, I think, what Bakhmut gets hit every day, or what was that
at the time? It was like at least one projectile was hitting the city every like 45 seconds. It was like nonstop.
You guys are going into Bakhmut to meet this unit and provide support to this unit. And we're going, and when we get to Kiev, we're prepping and we're briefing the team, doing our final. We're doing some last minute, training for our team to sharpen our team up on medical stuff and briefings. And then Seaspray pulls me aside and says, we just got 2 requests. One is a U.S. Marine who's serving with the Ukrainians, got shot in the stomach and captured by the Russians. And we had a proof of life and knew where he was. And we were asked to go get him. And so me and Seaspray were going to break off and go get this Marine.
Yeah.
We had a way to we weren't going to go kick in a door and steal him from the Russians. We had a orchestrated logistical way to get him from the Russians. So that's what we were going to go do. Members of our government agency had asked us to do that, and they knew we were going to this area, which was Izum. And they said, hey, when you go to Izum, the Ukrainians just retook Izum like that week from the Russians that had been occupied for 6 months. And the Ukrainians are claiming there's mass graves with 1,400 women and children in them. And they didn't want to believe the Ukrainians because, it's profit. They can make more tragic it is, the more money they get from U.S. taxpayers. So they're like, will you get eyes on and see if this is legit? If there's really these mass graves. So that was 2 things we were tasked with. And they come to you and say, hey, like, do you need me to go with you? Or are you comfortable for me to break off? And I'm going to go with Seaspray and do these 2 operations. And I think you were eager to say, you go do your thing. I'm going to go do mine.
Yeah.
And that's what we decided to do. And I think you guys were leaving the next day. Me and Seaspray packed up and probably left within an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And, drove through the night east, 2 hours past where Russian lines were, and ended up unfortunately losing the connection for this Marine and deviating over to identify these mass graves, which we did, and reported it to leaked information over to Fox News. And then by the time we were like settled in Izum, you're over in Bakhmut now. While we're in Izum, the Russians closed the line behind the Ukrainians and to retake Izum. And me and Seaspray are there with the Ukrainians. I remember we seen 2 MiGs fly over, dropped ordnance, which I never in my life had enemy air over me. Seaspray either. He's like, it's the first for me too, where you got enemy air dropping ordnance. We own the air in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And so that was like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And then indirect fire started landing within 100 meters of us, which that's very close, by the way, the football field distance, where enough to where you had dirt flying on you, windows breaking on buildings. And the Ukrainians were with small arms fire, fighting Russians, and they start moving back and to bust through the Russian line, which we're right there with them. And I called you to let you know what was going on. And I remember you asking, is that bombs landing in behind you? And I'm like, yes, we're getting indirect fire right now. And then you said, we are too. And then I could hear you guys getting direct fire at the same time. I could hear it on the phone. We were talking on iridiums, right?
No, I called you on my cell phone.
Oh, cell phone? I
Yeah.
couldn't remember exactly. So we're both of us 2.5 hours apart getting indirect fire at the same time. And for me, I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I just sent my son into this area. I got immediately, I wasn't worried about me and sea spray anymore. I was worried about you. and so that was my perception there. I don't know what your perception was being on the other end of that phone, but it was a pretty crazy moment for me.
Yeah. No, I was just focusing on my team and I getting out of there.
Yeah. What exactly happened to you guys in that moment?
Yeah, so we went into Bakhmut, and Bakhmut obviously was like the city that was just on fire, like completely obliterated by the Russians. Got into the heart of the city, and we were going to go across this bridge. Supposedly there was some Ukrainian military that we were going to meet with over there. And a bridge ended up being blown that morning, and so we weren't able to cross. Bad intel from the Ukrainian side. If we would have went into there, we would have went right into basically the hornet's nest of the Russians. Most likely killed right away. I get to this area, and I'm going to make you guys read the book to get the whole story of it. But this area wasn't safe. I knew that the area was compromised. And I knew from my experience in the military, being a forward observer, that was a pre-planned target. Like all they have to do is basically call up their artillery battery and say, hey, drop bombs on position A, because there's Americans on position A. It's not hard to tell what an American looks like. Like in Ukraine, like I'm wearing blue jeans and a plate carrier and a Patagonia shirt. You don't see Ukrainians walking around in blue jeans and a Patagonia and a plate carrier on. Like,
yeah.
Nice stuff. I knew we were in a bad spot. The Ukrainians we were with, these guys were not in the military. These guys were businessmen or pastors. They didn't understand how combat works. And so they were taking pictures out there, like getting their selfies, like around all this spot, like all this battle damaged area. And constantly I'm like on the lookout, like trying to make sure there's no snipers, making sure there's nobody coming after us. And then I start hearing artillery coming in closer to us. It starts creeping fire on our position. So rounds are getting closer. The ground starts to shake more. And basically at this moment in time, I was like, we need to leave right now. One of my best friends, Steve, like I said, him and I were in Afghanistan together. He was with me here. We both looked at each other like, let's go. Like, this is not safe. So we hop in the truck and we take off out of the city. As soon as we get out of the city, we start taking like serious indirect fire on our vehicle as it's moving. Rounds start hitting in front of us. Rounds start hitting behind us, on the sides, left and right. Every time I would watch the rounds impact the ground within a few feet of our vehicle, the explosion and the debris, shrapnel, everything would go into the complete opposite direction. It's like we had a bubble of protection around us. 5 minutes before that happened, before we even hit the gas on that truck, I prayed for our team, like we all prayed together. I said, God, protect us, like get us out of here safely. Do whatever you have to do to make sure that we stay alive. And so I drove like a bat out of hell out of that city. Never driven through a city so fast in my life. And, I look back at that situation and I just look at how powerful the protection of God can be in your life. Like being in God's will, like you said, there's no safer place than being in the will of God. And that was proof right there. Like I was in the will of God. If I died that day, I would have died because it was God's will for me to die doing what he has called me to do. The fear of death didn't scare me there because I felt so close to God at that time. And I remember as soon as that artillery fire ended, I remember texting my wife, Alex, and saying how much I loved her because I was like, holy crap, I almost just died. Like, I didn't tell her that. I just said, I love you so much. Like, But it kind of puts stuff into perspective of like what I'm doing here is extremely hazardous, but there's a reward that I might not see here on earth, but I will see eventually in heaven. My perspective of you, I was like, my dad's in the same position I am in. Mm-hmm. I didn't think your position was as bad as mine because I'm like focusing. I didn't think too much about yours.
Yeah.
I was just trying to focus on what was going on in front of me. But then at the end of the day, like us talking about it, it's like, holy crap. Like, how crazy is it that we are in the same country, like not too far apart, going through the exact same thing? If that doesn't prove to me that we were doing something right, I don't know what else does.
Yeah.
Like, there's an enemy out there trying to physically kill us. Mm-hmm. Yeah. A demonic presence trying to take us off earth because we're doing what God has called us to do.
That's right. I believe that too. With all the politics aside, who are the real victims in this war? Everybody's like, hey, is Russia the good guys? Mm-hmm. Is Ukraine the bad guys? Like, is it vice versa? Like, everybody's trying to figure it out, but who are the real victims?
The civilians.
Yeah.
Both on the Ukrainian and Russian side. The Ukrainian civilians are having to pay the price of death. Mm-hmm. They're being bombed in their homes. Their children are being killed. It just seems to not stop. In Russia, the government of Russia is conscripting civilians off the streets to go to the front line to fight. And many of these people might not agree with what Russia is doing in Ukraine. There's a lot of Russians that don't agree with what Russia is doing. I mean, I was on a boat fishing with a Russian and a Ukrainian back in November, and these guys have families in both countries. Ukraine and Russia, like, they're pretty much the same country in a way because they both have family in each of them.
Yeah, it'd be like us fighting Canada.
Yeah, exactly. We win, but it's really, really sad that civilians on both sides are having to pay the price of political leaders.
Of all the things you've seen there, what's probably the most horrific thing that sticks out to you?
Probably being on the streets, and this doesn't even involve seeing anybody dead. Probably on the streets of a town called Khmelnytskyi. So one of my really good friends that I work with there, his name's Vitaly. Him and his family live in Khmelnytskyi, and he's got a daughter that just turned 19. Mm-hmm. She's actually living here in the Woodlands right now because they fear for their daughter's life, so they sent her to the U.S. to go to school. Mm-hmm. And he has two sons. One is 16, and then the other, I think, is like 7. But there was an attack on Khmelnytskyi about a year and a half ago, just completely devastated the city. And hearing the cries of the women and children is probably the most devastating thing I could have seen or heard, because these people that haven't done anything wrong are being murdered by the Russians.
Yeah.
And they can't do anything. You can't do anything about like a ballistic missile coming into your country, taking out thousands of lives.
Yeah.
Like, that's the most horrific thing, is that the women and children are dying in their own homes.
Yeah.
And they can't do anything about it.
Clearly, my position is, I believe the only way for this to end is a change in the U.S. presidential administration. Mm-hmm. Obviously, right now it's between President Biden and President Trump. I think the only thing that's changes is President Trump coming in and ending this. He says he would end it before he even assumes office as president-elect. He would end it within a day, which I believe him, by the way. I believe he has the ability to call for a humanitarian ceasefire and enact NATO to go in and provide humanitarian aid, which would, create a scenario where Putin wouldn't risk Article 5 violation, and some line would be drawn somewhere, and that would end it. So I believe President Trump would do that. So outside of President Trump winning the U.S. presidential election, going in and making this change, if things stay on the path that they are on right now, how do you think this ends?
I think there's only so many bullets and bombs that the world can give Ukraine before they run out of men to fight. I've seen firsthand experience of the bullets and bombs saving my life in Ukraine. I was in Kyiv in February, and, the Patriot missile system activated one morning and was shooting incoming Russian missiles out of the air. And
by the way, so he FaceTimed me, and he's showing me out his window the missiles coming into the city and then going shot out of the air.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I saw an apartment building get taken out across the street from us, and
that was not fun to watch, but
but that, I think the support that we have been giving Ukraine in weapons and arms has been beneficial for the world.
Yeah.
Many people might disagree with me,
Well, I would say it. I wouldn't. Well, I mean, I'm not speaking for you. I'm speaking for me.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not a fan of the dollars.
Yeah.
I think they're not being used, and I think there's corruption that is misusing that money and not getting where it's supposed. But the weapons and stuff like that.
Definitely money. Money's the weird thing, right? Because I've seen firsthand what the armament does that we ship to them. But the money is supposed to buy troops basic things like food, boots, clothes, the things that are the necessities.
Tourniquets.
Tourniquets. And I haven't seen a lot of that firsthand. Mm-hmm. And so I think there might be some mishandling of the money that is not benefiting the Ukrainian soldier. Because I think every single one of those dollars that the U.S. gives Ukraine needs to go to the soldier. Politics-wise, on how this war, it can either go one or two ways. If Trump wins the election this year, which I think personally, in my own personal opinion, I think Trump needs to win this election for the future of the United States and the safety of the world. With the war in Ukraine, I think Trump could speak on behalf of Ukraine and Russia to bring them to a ceasefire.
Yeah.
Because Ukraine in the world, yeah. Because Ukraine is running out of men to fight. They only have so many men.
They're grabbing men off the street. They're starting to do what Russia's doing right now.
Yeah, and it's so hard to fight if you don't have people to fight.
Yeah.
Russia has an abundance. Russia's the biggest country. Like, they are a superpower. I really think that it's going to take a massive political change in the United States government to have a positive and successful outcome for Ukraine. My heart will always be with Ukraine. Like, I always pray for victory of Ukraine. And I hope Ukraine will pull through. The current administration within our own U.S. government hinders the victory of Ukraine.
You're 27 years old. You've seen a lot. For those listening who haven't seen war firsthand, like you and I have, what should they know? One, what role can individuals play on a global scale to deter from war and all these things that you're seeing in places like Ukraine?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, that's a question that I'm pretty sure people have been asking since the very first war there ever was.
Yeah.
As long as there's human beings and opinions and politics on the planet, there will always be war.
Yeah.
And I don't think that'll ever change. The definition of war is basically political gain. Well, the only way for war to end is for everybody to be like-minded and equally yoked, but that'll never happen. That's a hard question to answer. Like, I don't want to be up here and sound like a hippie, like, oh yeah, everybody just needs to love each other, because that's not going to be the case.
Right.
But if you can use the freedoms that you have here in the United States to vote for the right people to get into the office, that have good policy, that have good morals, that are not war hungry or want to get rich off war, I think that'll make a massive shift within the United States. Every single president that we've had really in modern history, besides Trump, has taken us into some sort of war.
Yeah, but in my lifetime, the only president that has not taken us to a new war has been President Trump. And everybody called him a warmonger. Look, I agree with you. I think the two things that people could do is one, pray. And people will say, prayer's like hollow, doesn't do anything. No, prayer works. Yeah. I believe in prayer. I believe in power of prayer. So pray for peace. Pray for peace in Israel. Pray for peace in Ukraine. Pray for America to be protected and safe. Pray. But you also have to take physical action. And we have the right and freedoms to vote. Cast your vote. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. I'll tell you who I think you should vote for. I think you should vote President Trump, whether you like him or not. He is the right choice to keep for our national security, for our economy, and for things, around the world like Ukraine. This will not end under President Biden. Yeah, it will only keep going, and millions of people will die, and the U.S. taxpayers are going to keep funding endless war. So vote. That's one thing you could do, and you have the freedom to do it. Every service member who has fought, bled, and died wearing a uniform since 1775 has done so. So you have the freedom to vote. Don't neglect it. Take advantage of it and vote. That's my message. Yeah,
we're in such a weird spot right now too, because some may say we're not in a physical war, but in some ways we are. But what we're in right now is a definite proxy war.
Yeah,
leading to World War III.
You have over 30 countries.
Yeah,
you have over 30 countries that are in Ukraine right now fighting. You just had a U.S. cluster bomb kill 100 civilians in Crimea. You have North Korea, South Korea, Japan, Russia, Iran, all these.
Every world superpower is involved in this.
Yeah, so you might say it is a World War III by proxy, by modern era.
Yeah. Well, we look at World War II. It took the United States, I think, 3 or 4 years to get involved in Europe before, like, it began, right? So we're coming up on 3 years in February. We're getting closer and closer. Vladimir Putin was in North Korea this week, and now North Korea is publicly saying that they are sending North Korean troops by the end of July into Ukraine to fight.
Yeah.
We have France who's saying that they're going to send troops into Ukraine to fight. So it's growing. It's evolving. It's not getting any smaller. It's getting a whole lot bigger.
Guys, November's not that far away.
Yeah.
This thing will get out of control. It's already out of control, but it will progress. You're right. In the book, one of the most powerful things in the closing chapter is about God's timing.
Yeah.
I think you nailed it. It's brilliant how you pulled it off. I was super proud of reading it, but it also spoke a lot to me. So you revealed how God's timing gave you such an important lessons on patience for waiting on Him, kind of tied to your dream as a kid. Tell us about the vision and the story that you brought to light in that closing chapter.
Yeah, so it really talks about my dream. It talks about that dream I had as a kid, feeling called to do something that was bigger than myself. Even outside the military, I feel like what I do now is even more impactful than what I did in the Marine Corps. But waiting on God's timing has always been one of the hardest things for me personally in my life. But sometimes God has you in that position for a reason, to be in that holding pattern, so that when that time does come, it's the perfect time in His timing. And I'll read the last sentence of this. It can take years for the things that God places on your heart to start to flourish. But when they finally do, it's not the end of the story. It's just the beginning. And I think that's something that I needed to hear in my own personal life, because I had a life story, but God's calling in my life took some time to really start, right? Like I was following God, I was serving God, but I felt like I wasn't doing what God had called me to do yet. I was in the season of being prepared. And God has you in certain seasons to get prepared for the next season. And that's what God was doing. You got to be patient on God's timing.
Yeah, it's really powerful. If anything else, guys, read the book for Hunter's chapter. So we'll wrap it up with that. I do want to ask, I always like to ask the guest for a word of encouragement to our audience. And if you could share a message to those listening right now who are struggling with purpose, you seem to have definitely found yours, but those who are struggling with purpose, worth, just battling with patience themselves, do you have a word of encouragement for them?
Sometimes for me personally, I want things to happen really fast.
Yeah.
Right. And I think us men, especially guys that are like alpha males or have been in the military, like we want something, we get it, and we make it happen. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately, most of the time in my life. But when it does happen, it's visible. And don't continue just standing by, waiting for something to happen. Continue to move forward towards that goal. One of my goals was always to be a pilot. And, I thought I was going to do it 10 years ago, but God's timing, I started it 4 months ago. We don't understand God's timing. We never will. There's a lot of waiting that you see in the Bible. There's a lot of patience that we see in the Bible, but God's timing is the perfect timing.
Well, guys, again, one more plug here. If you have not gotten a copy of Mission Without Borders, go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere books are sold. You can find a link. You go right directly on my website, chadrobichaux.com, and get all the links through there. Get a copy. It's a huge support to the mission and work that I do, the humanitarian work I do, that Hunter does, to all of our team, to help people around the world. And I truly think you'll enjoy this book and pick up so many valuable lessons from it. And you'll get it delivered on the release day, August 13th. Again, just go to chadrobichaux.com or Barnes & Noble, Amazon to get a copy of the book. Guys, thank you so much for supporting this book. Super special episode with you, Hunter. It was long, but it was good.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to get it out for everyone to hear. So love you, man.
Love you.
Super.
Thank you.
Till next week, guys.